Hey guys. Tonight we're stepping inside the smoke-choked, paranoia-soaked life of a man who wasn't casting spells in towers. He was barely scraping by in the shadows. The medieval wizard. You've probably pictured him straight out of a fantasy movie. Flowing robes, glowing staff, thunder rolling at his command. No, the real wizard? He reeked of sulfur, lived in a flea-ridden shack, and spent his days coughing over failed experiments while neighbors whispered he was cursed. This wasn't mystical power. It was fear, fraud, and desperation. One bad prediction away from the stake. This is the grim reality of the medieval wizard. And trust me, by the end of tonight, you'll never picture Merlin the same way again. And hey, if you want to help keep this channel from going the way of a wizard's failed potion, smoky, broke, and possibly poisonous, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link pinned below. No pressure. But every coin buys me a few more days before the villagers drag me to the stake. But before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. Congratulations! You've just woken up as a medieval wizard. The good news is you survived the night without your workshop catching fire. The bad news is you smell like sulfur, rancid goat fat, and whatever chemical experiment you spilled on yourself yesterday. Your head pounds from staying up until dawn copying astrological tables, your mouth tastes like wet parchment, and your hair is glued to your scalp with a sticky mixture of sweat, candle wax, and dust. It is the smell of genius, or at least that's what you'll tell anyone who complains. You open your eyes, though calling it waking up is generous. You never really sleep well. Your bed is a wooden pallet covered in a straw mattress that pokes through the sackcloth every time you roll over. The straw is damp, filled with fleas, and carries the faint scent of urine because your cat, your only assistant and possible familiar, decided the corner of your bed was the perfect place for nightly offerings. You roll to one side and nearly crush a leather-bound notebook filled with smudged ink stains and half-legible spells. Ink bottles tip dangerously close to your face. One wrong twitch in the night, and you could wake up covered in black splotches that will take weeks to fade from your skin. The hut around you is a disaster, though in wizarding terms this is called an archive. Stacks of parchment line the floor, curling at the edges from damp air. Clay pots filled with herbs and dried flowers hang from beams above, shedding dust and petals every time the wind nudges the roof. A cracked crucible lies abandoned by the hearth, blackened with soot from an experiment that ended in more smoke than revelation. A pile of bones, animal you hope, sits on one shelf next to jars of murky liquid whose contents you have long forgotten. To outsiders, it looks like the lair of a dark sorcerer. To you, it's just home, though you can't shake the gnawing suspicion that one day something will crawl out of those jars and demand rent. The first sound you hear each morning isn't the cheerful chirp of birds, but the thud of the church bell echoing across town. Each clang is both a call to prayer and a reminder that the men in robes up the hill consider you a liability, to be tolerated at best, hunted at worst. Wizards tread a fine line between scholar and heretic. One misinterpreted experiment, one neighbor's accusation, and you could find yourself stripped naked in the market square while a priest shouts Latin verses over a pile of firewood. It is hard to feel enthusiastic about the new day when every sunrise carries the faint aroma of impending immolation. Still, you shuffle to your feet. Your tunic sticks to your back with sweat, your legs itch from flea bites, and your hands shake slightly from inhaling too many fumes. You mutter a quick protective charm under your breath, not because you believe it works, but because it feels better than starting the day unarmed. Wizards live half their lives in fear of invisible forces, demons lurking in shadows, curses drifting on the wind, or worse, the plague creeping silently through the village. A charm, even a fake one, is as much armor as you can afford. Step outside and the world greets you with suspicion. The townsfolk know you, the odd man with ink-stained fingers and a hut that smells like burning metal. Children whisper that you can turn into a raven. Old women cross themselves when you pass. Farmers glare, half hoping you'll bless their crops, half fearing you cursed them last year when the barley failed. Your reputation is as unstable as the mercury you keep bottled in your workshop. Some days you're a miracle worker, the only one who can cure a cough or predict a lucky day for planting. Other days you're a devil's servant, one bad harvest away from being dragged into the square. And what exactly do you do all day, mighty wizard? Mostly you shuffle between tedious experiments, copying pages of incomprehensible Latin, grinding herbs until your arms ache, and trying not to starve. Your big magical project is probably some hopeless alchemical dream of turning lead into gold. Your results so far: cracked pots, suspicious powders, and a lot of coughing. But you keep trying, because that fantasy of gold isn't just greed, it's survival. A wizard who cracks the secret of transmutation could earn protection from kings. One who fails might end up selling fake charms to peasants until someone reports him. This is your life. No mighty staff, no fireballs, no grand feasts in candlelit halls. Just a drafty hut filled with smoke, a body riddled with flea bites, and a constant game of deception where you pretend to understand the secrets of the universe while desperately hoping no one notices how little you actually know. Wizards were not creatures of legend. They were scholars with migraines, con men with ink-stained hands, and dreamers too stubborn to admit the world was not as magical as they wanted it to be. And yet, in the middle of all this grime, fear, and futility, there is something strange, a flicker of possibility, a spark in the smoke. Because while most of your days blur together in a haze of sulfur and paranoia, every so often one experiment does something unexpected. A chemical changes color. A herb brew calms a fever. A planetary chart lines up with real events. For a moment, you believe. For a moment, you feel like you've glimpsed the true fabric of the universe, hidden just behind the soot-stained walls of your hut. Then the moment passes, your lamp goes out, and you're left sneezing in the dark. Welcome to the life of a medieval wizard. It's not glorious. It's not heroic. It smells terrible. But somehow, impossibly, it's still just magical enough to keep you going one more day. If you picture a wizard, chances are your mind conjures up the familiar fantasy. A tall figure in flowing robes, clutching a gnarled staff, sparks of magic crackling at his fingertips as villagers gaze in awe. He commands storms, summons fireballs, and dispenses cryptic wisdom in a voice that booms like thunder. That's the myth. The story told in taverns, whispered around campfires, and eventually spun into the fairy tales that survive today. The reality, however, is a lot less impressive. The real wizard was more likely to shuffle through town with greasy hair, ink stains on his hands, and a wool tunic so patched and threadbare it looked more like a beggar's rags than mystical robes. His staff wasn't glowing with runes. It was just a walking stick because his back ached from crouching over manuscripts for 12 hours a day. The robe myth is especially laughable. In paintings and later literature, wizards are draped in star-spangled garments, stitched with gold thread, gleaming in candlelight. In truth, your wizardly attire was usually whatever you hadn't already ruined with ash, wax, or goat's blood. More often than not, it was stained linen and scratchy wool, stiff from days of sweat and nights of spilt concoctions. Instead of majestic hats with crescent moons, your head was covered in unwashed hair that hung in oily clumps. The most magical transformation your wardrobe could offer was briefly smelling less like smoke after a neighbor lent you their soap. And the staff. Forget about it. Nobody's walking around with enchanted oak carved by elves. Your staff was either a cane you picked up in the forest or a stick used to poke the fire in your workshop. Maybe you scratched a symbol into it once to impress a gullible villager, but in reality, it was less a conduit of power and more a tool for limping home after another failed experiment left you dizzy from the fumes. If a torch-wielding mob ever came for you, the staff's greatest magical property was snapping in half when someone swung it at your skull. Then, there are the fireballs, the ultimate fantasy cliché. In truth, the closest you're coming to summoning fire is accidentally blowing yourself up with a batch of saltpeter and sulfur you mixed in the wrong ratio. Villagers didn't stand back in awe of your pyrotechnics. They stood back because your hut reeked of burned hair, and your eyebrows were missing for the third time this month. Most of your experiments produce nothing more than colored smoke, sticky sludge, or cracked pots. Every once in a while, something fizzled dramatically, which you would later describe as controlled magic while coughing black soot out of your lungs. What you did have, however, were jars. Jars of every size, shape, and smell, stacked in corners, hidden under tables, balanced on shelves, one sneeze away from collapse. Inside them floated questionable liquids, unidentifiable powders, and objects that looked like they belonged in nightmares. A dead lizard curled up in brine, a cloudy fluid with something that might have been a tooth bobbing in it, a lump of fat with herbs pressed into its surface. None of it looked like wisdom or magic. It looked like evidence. To the townsfolk, those jars were proof you were dabbling in forces better left untouched. To you, they were all you had. Half-finished experiments, desperate attempts at turning knowledge into something tangible. And every time you saw a neighbor glance at them with narrowed eyes, you knew how easily they could tip the balance from curiosity to accusation, because reputation was everything. In town, you were both feared and needed, loathed and consulted. Farmers might spit in the dust when you passed, muttering prayers under their breath. But if their cow fell sick or their wife couldn't conceive, who else would they come crawling to? They would approach you in the dark, cloak pulled tight, whispering for a charm or potion, begging you not to tell anyone. They wanted you close enough to fix their problems, but far enough to keep from contaminating their souls. To the church, you were a risk. To the nobility, you were entertainment or a potential tool. To the poor, you were a last resort. No one trusted you, but no one could entirely ignore you either. And then, there were the debts. Wizards weren't rolling in treasure or commanding castles. You borrowed coins from a baker one week to buy ink, promised a farmer results after taking his last sack of barley, and pawned your own shoes to pay for mercury from a traveling merchant. Half your magical career was spent juggling debts, lying through your teeth about the timing of results, or ducking creditors in the marketplace. Nothing screamed powerful sorcerer quite like hiding behind a cart of cabbages because you owed 3 different people money for experiments that had gone nowhere. You dreamed of gold, of course. Every wizard did. But the dream was mostly about not starving this winter. The real magic, then, was not in lightning bolts or enchanted relics, but in survival. Every day was a performance, a careful balancing act between the awe people wanted to believe in and the reality you lived. You cultivated mystery, muttered Latin phrases you barely understood, let smoke curl from your hut in calculated plumes, and always kept a few bizarre props handy to sell the illusion. A bundle of bones, a carved symbol, a jar that bubbled ominously when warmed by the fire. Anything to remind the villagers that, yes, you were dangerous, and therefore, yes, you should be left alone. But behind the illusion was just you, tired, broke, hunched over a cluttered table, hoping that this mixture of herbs might actually ease someone's cough, or that this chart of planetary motions might one day impress the local noble enough to pay you. You knew your reputation could collapse in a heartbeat, reduced from wise man to fraud or witch, the moment a neighbor's child died of fever. The robe, the staff, the fireball, those were myths designed to make sense of the chaos. The reality was jars of suspicious liquid, hair you hadn't washed in weeks, debts you couldn't repay, and a town that both feared and despised you. And still, somehow, you clung to the role, because even if you weren't Gandalf, you were something rarer, a human being daring to poke at the edges of mystery, armed with nothing but bad hair, bad debts, and the hope that your jars might one day contain more than disappointment. Forget the stone towers spiraling into the clouds, etched with glowing runes and humming with cosmic power. That's the fantasy version, the kind you'd find on the cover of a pulp novel. The reality of where a medieval wizard actually lived is far less romantic. If you've woken up this morning as one of them, congratulations. You've opened your eyes not to sweeping vistas from atop a battlement, but to the ceiling of a hut so low you can touch it without standing up. The walls are wattle and daub, cracked with age, the roof thatched badly enough that you can hear the wind sighing through it. The floor isn't stone, it's dirt, packed hard in summer and sticky with mud in winter. You don't live above the peasants in some high place, you live among them. Except your hut smells worse and is cluttered with things no one else dares touch. The first thing that greets you isn't the sight of books or the glow of enchanted orbs. It's the smell, and it's not a single smell, but a layered, aggressive orchestra that assaults you before you've even sat up in bed. There's the acrid tang of candle smoke, because you burned tallow sticks late into the night trying to decipher some passage of Aristotle. The wax dripped onto the dirt floor, hardened, and then melted again, fusing with grit and hair into something that will never, ever come out. Then there's the sour stench of urine jars. That's right, urine jars. Because in the so-called science of the time, nothing said serious investigation like collecting bodily fluids. Every wizard had them. Some swore by their use in divination, others in alchemy, others simply lacked the energy to carry the bucket outside. Add to that the scent of animal skins drying on a line, ink made from oak galls going rancid, and the faint rot of herbs that died 3 months ago, but that you still insist might be useful. Your hut doesn't smell like knowledge. It smells like a latrine had a fist fight with a library and lost. Visually, it's not much better. Imagine a space too cramped to hold all your research, but you're too stubborn to get rid of any of it. Shelves sag under the weight of scrolls and manuscripts, many of them borrowed and never returned. Loose parchment curls on the table, corners darkened from grease-stained fingers. Jars and bottles are everywhere, each filled with something more questionable than the last. One holds what looks like black sludge with a feather stuck in it. Another, a cloudy fluid in which something pale and fleshy floats. You keep telling yourself it's a pig's eye, though it might also be a rotten onion. Above the table hangs a cluster of dried herbs, once green but now gray, shedding powder every time you brush past them. Somewhere beneath the mess is a chair, though you're not entirely sure if it still has all its legs. This is not an orderly study of wisdom. It's a hoarder's nest, fueled by insomnia and desperation. And yet, you cling to the idea of mystery. To anyone peeking in, your living space is chaos, but to you, it's a theater of the arcane. You deliberately leave skulls on display, not because they're rare, but because they make villagers pause. Bones scattered on a shelf, a jar with a dark liquid you call a philosopher's extract. A string of feathers you've pretended is a protective charm. You know presentation is half the work. If they think your hut is dangerous, they'll respect you enough not to ask too many questions. In reality, half of it is clutter you haven't had the energy to clean up. The protective charm is moldy chicken bones tied with a shoelace. The extract is just tar mixed with wine. But in this cramped, smoky room, perception is everything. Of course, not all wizards lived in huts. Some had the luck, or misfortune, to set up shop in monastery corners. Tucked away in cloisters, you might be surrounded by candlelight, quiet, and the suspicious stares of monks who don't entirely approve of your pursuits. The air smells less like urine but more like damp stone and wax. Here, your tools are books chained to desks, pages of Latin text copied so many times the letters bleed into each other. If you're tolerated, it's only because your knowledge of astrology helps the abbot pick feast days or because you know enough medicine to lance a boil without killing the patient. But your corner of the monastery is still unmistakable. It reeks of sulfur and ink, and the monks whisper that your soul probably smells the same. In cities, the luckiest of your kind sometimes rented upper rooms above apothecaries or taverns. Don't imagine grandeur here either. These rooms were narrow, the ceilings low, the walls sweating with damp. You had a single window that looked out over a noisy street and let in the smell of horses and sewage. From here you might hawk horoscopes or promise charms to wealthy merchants' wives. You were closer to coin but also closer to scrutiny. The church kept a sharper eye on city wizards, and a careless experiment involving smoke or suspicious powders could get you reported. Still, there was more food than in the countryside, and you might even have enough coin to buy vellum instead of scavenging scraps of parchment. A luxury, really. Wherever you lived, though, one detail united every wizard's dwelling: fire hazard. Between the candles, the parchments, the powders, and the perpetual layer of dust, your hut, study, or cell was one spark away from vanishing in smoke. The air itself seemed combustible, thick with fumes from boiling concoctions, sweet resin from incense meant to mask the urine smell, and the ever-present smoke from your hearth. If you lived in a hut, the smoke never left. It clung to the thatch, to your clothes, to your skin. Step outside, and people could smell wizard on you from 50 paces. The smell wasn't mystical. It was just bad ventilation. At night, when the village grows quiet or the monastery bells fall silent, you sit in this clutter and try to convince yourself it's worth it. The mess, the smell, the hunched posture, the way your hair is permanently perfumed with candle soot. You tell yourself that within this chaos there's knowledge waiting, a breakthrough, a secret that will change everything. But deep down, you know the truth. You don't live in a tower reaching to the stars. You live in a shack, a cell, a corner room so suffocating it feels less like a sanctum of wisdom and more like a prison of your own making. And yet, this is home. The jars, the scrolls, the smoke. They're what separate you from the villagers outside who till fields and never ask questions about the heavens. They may laugh at your clutter, hold their noses at your smell, or whisper about the devil living under your roof. But none of them can deny that stepping into your space feels different. Not because it's magical in the way they imagine, but because it's heavy with the weight of someone desperately trying to wring secrets from a stubborn universe. It's uncomfortable. It's filthy. It's chaotic. But it's the only place you belong. Congratulations, you've survived the night. Barely. You didn't wake up in a feather bed beneath velvet curtains embroidered with moons and stars, the way storybooks like to paint the life of a wizard. You woke up in the kind of bed that isn't really a bed at all. Just a pile of straw stuffed into a sagging frame that used to belong to some farmer's goat. The straw is damp from last night's rain, lumpy from months of use, and crawling with lice that have been feasting on your scalp since you lay down. You shift your weight and hear the scuttle of something alive beneath you, and you pray it's only a beetle and not one of the mice who've taken up residence in your bedding. The blanket covering you is coarse wool, stiff with old sweat and smoke, and so heavy with grime it smells more like a dead sheep than anything fit for human use. This is what passes for rest in your line of work. The first sounds of the morning reach you from outside. A neighbor's rooster crowing, the creak of a cartwheel on muddy ruts, the murmur of voices already up and busy. Not your voice, of course. Wizards aren't up before dawn with the honest folk. Too many late nights hunched over smoke-blackened manuscripts have left you pale and heavy-eyed. The villagers notice, and they whisper about it. They don't call it insomnia. They call it Satan keeping you up. They're convinced you've been whispering to demons under candlelight, making bargains while they slept. Your windows glow later than theirs, your chimney smokes at odd hours, and they take note. Their superstition is your armor and your curse. It makes them wary enough not to ask questions, but suspicious enough to wonder whether their crops failing has something to do with your experiments. You sit up and immediately regret it. The air in your hut is thick with the smell of smoke and sourness. Yesterday's candle sputtered out into its own puddle of fat, and the wick left a smear of soot on the wall. Your head throbs as though a mule kicked it in the night, but it's just the smell and the stale air combining into a permanent haze. You can't see the floorboards because there are none. It's dirt, cold and damp, pressed down by years of pacing. You rub your eyes and try not to think about the fact that every scrap of straw you slept on is now part of the same ecosystem that supports lice, fleas, and the occasional rat nest. And speaking of rats, your first chore isn't breakfast, prayer, or stretching. It's pest control. You shuffle to your feet, your bare soles instantly collecting grit and something sticky you don't investigate. Above your bed hang the bundles of herbs you dried weeks ago. Sage, fennel, rosemary, whatever scraps you convinced someone to sell you in the market. They were supposed to be your store of ingredients for the coming winter, but the rats discovered them first. Now the bundles are frayed and chewed, and little black pellets decorate the table beneath them. You hiss like a tired cat, clap your hands, and watch as two brown shapes dart up the rafters and vanish through the thatch. Congratulations. The Grand Master of Alchemy and Astrology begins his morning by fighting rodents for half-eaten parsley. Once you've shooed away the pests, you attempt some semblance of hygiene, though hygiene is a generous word. There's no basin of steaming water, no scented soap, just a cracked bowl half filled with stale liquid that may have once been fresh. You splash it on your face, pretending it makes you clean, but the truth is you smell of sulfur, smoke, and sweat layered from weeks without a proper wash. Your hair is lank and greasy, curling in odd directions where lice have laid claim. A comb, if you have one, is missing teeth and drags painfully across your scalp. You tug through the knots anyway, because appearing too disheveled makes the neighbors whisper louder. There is no winning. Too neat, and they think you're enchanting your appearance. Too ragged, and they think you've been rolling in graves. Your clothes are the same you wore yesterday, and the day before, and probably the month before. A tunic stained at the sleeves from ink spills and melted wax, patched at the elbows so many times the patches have patches. The robe? The fabled garment of stars and sigils. Not here. What you pull on is a faded wool coat that smells faintly of mildew. The only thing mystical about it is the fact that it hasn't fallen apart entirely. You cinch a belt around your waist, not for fashion but to hold the pouches of odds and ends you insist on carrying. Chalk, a stub of candle, a little packet of dried nettles. You tell yourself they're necessary. Deep down you know they're just trinkets you can grab in a hurry if someone barges in demanding a charm. Outside, the morning has properly begun. You hear neighbors talking low, and you know some of it is about you. Children are warned not to linger near your door. Women mutter a prayer when your shadow crosses the lane. Men give you space, as though standing too close might invite lightning. They think you consort with forces better left alone. You do nothing to correct them. In truth, the only forces you consort with are rats, mold, and the perpetual cough from breathing too much smoke indoors. But their fear buys you silence. Better they imagine you spend the night in deep communion with devils than know the truth. That you fall asleep hunched over a cracked desk, drooling onto Latin texts you barely understand. You sit at that desk now, or what passes for one. It's a plank across two barrels, both half rotten. The surface is cluttered with scraps of parchment, each one blotched with ink that never fully dried because your quill splays more than it writes. Among the papers are jars with crusted lips, little bottles corked with rags, a knife with a blackened blade. You shuffle them into some kind of order, trying to convince yourself the day has begun, that knowledge awaits, that maybe today you'll stumble upon the secret of transmuting lead or predicting the future. But first, you scratch at your wrist. Another flea bite. Another reminder that your companions are not angels or spirits, but vermin. And so begins the morning of a wizard. Not a blaze of fire, not a tower humming with spells, but straw itching your back, neighbors whispering about your soul, rats swinging from your rafters, and you sitting in smoke-stained squalor, convincing yourself that somewhere in this mess lies greatness. You tell yourself it's all part of the mystery, but really, it's just another day trying to survive in the stink of your own legend. The day never really begins with grandeur. Wizards don't rise to long tables stacked with roasted pheasant, goblets of wine, and glowing blue potions like something out of a stage play. No, your breakfast is about as magical as a rock. You shuffle over to the corner where yesterday's food is still sitting in a cracked wooden bowl, and you poke it with a finger to check if it's grown mold overnight. The bread you left out is hard enough to chip a tooth, the crust curling like dried leather. You dunk it into a bowl of onion soup that has been reheated so many times it tastes more like smoke than onion, and you chew slowly, trying not to think about how it squeaks between your teeth. This is not the breakfast of champions. It is the breakfast of survival. There's no variety, no luxury, and certainly no promise of nutrition. Most mornings you get bread, onions, and if fortune is on your side, maybe a little piece of cheese that hasn't gone green around the edges. The bread is always stale, because you don't have the luxury of a daily baker's run. You buy a week's worth at once, or rather, you take whatever someone will sell you after you've scribbled a horoscope or drawn a protective symbol on their door in exchange. By the end of the week, that bread is transformed into a weapon more than a meal, and you have to dunk it in liquid just to keep your jaw intact. The onion soup isn't much better. It's a watery concoction boiled in a pot so scorched that everything you cook has the faint taste of charred iron. It fills your stomach, but only in the way mud fills a hole. Sometimes, if the night has been long and your mind is restless with strange thoughts, you turn to something less conventional. You pull one of your jars from the shelf. The ones you insist are elixirs. In reality, they are experiments gone half right, half rotten. Vinegar mixed with herbs, rainwater left too long in a copper pot, or wine spiked with whatever roots you dug up in the forest. You drink them because you've convinced yourself they might unlock secrets. Long life, sharper vision, protection from plague. In practice, they mostly unlock stomach cramps, a racing heart, or a headache that feels like someone ringing a church bell inside your skull. But you still take them, because what if? What if the one you brewed last night really is the key to something greater? The question is enough to outweigh the gagging. So you sip, grimace, and remind yourself that real wisdom doesn't taste good. You think of ancient philosophers and imagine them choking down worse than this. You cough until your ribs ache, wipe your mouth on your sleeve, and call it alchemy. The truth is you're experimenting on the only subject you have easy access to, yourself. Nobody else will risk it, and you can't afford test animals. If the mixture makes you sick, you tell yourself you're learning. If it makes you dizzy, maybe that's the veil of reality thinning. If it makes you vomit, perhaps that's the toxins leaving your body. You're very good at justifying failure as progress, especially when your stomach is empty. On the mornings when you can't face another bite of bread and onions, there's always weak beer. Not the kind of frothy golden ale you're imagining, but a thin, flat liquid brewed to be safer than water. The stream near your hut is filled with runoff from chamber pots and butcher's scraps, and if you drink it straight, you'll spend the next 2 days clutched around your belly, wishing for death. Beer is the compromise. It's low alcohol, sour, and about as refreshing as licking the inside of an old barrel, but it won't kill you. Children drink it, old men drink it, and you drink it first thing in the morning, telling yourself it sharpens the mind. Really, It just numbs the taste of your food long enough to swallow it. There are days you fantasize about feasts, of course. You picture a loaf of white bread soft enough to tear with your fingers, sweet fruit from a warm country, or even a slice of roasted meat dripping with fat. But that's a dream for nobles and merchants, not for a wizard with a reputation too suspicious for steady work and too poor to bribe himself into comfort. You chew your crust, sip your weak beer, and accept that magic will never fill your belly. It may open doors, it may frighten neighbors, but it will never season your soup. And then there are the truly unfortunate mornings, when your own curiosity leads you to pour something bizarre into your breakfast on purpose. Maybe it's powdered bone, ground too fine to chew but sprinkled over soup in the belief it will strengthen yours. Maybe it's sulfur, shaved into wine to purify the blood. Maybe it's mercury scraped from a broken vial, diluted with honey, and swallowed because some ancient manuscript promised enlightenment. These are not meals. They are punishments disguised as science. You've spent entire afternoons clutching your gut and shivering on the floor because of them. Yet tomorrow, you'll try again. Because to be a wizard is not to know. It's to wonder. And when you wonder with an empty stomach, you eat the question. By the time you finish, there's no satisfaction, only a dull heaviness. The bread feels like rocks in your stomach. The soup tastes like regret, and the elixir is already gnawing at your insides. You wipe your greasy hands on your tunic and tell yourself you're ready to face the day, but the truth is you're already tired. Not from labor, not from spells, but from breakfast itself. Eating isn't pleasure. It's an obstacle course. Each morning you survive, it is another small miracle. So no, the wizard's morning meal is not a grand feast of arcane delights. It is bread hard enough to hammer nails, soup as thin as excuses, and a mouthful of liquid courage brewed by desperation. It is the stubborn act of putting something into your body so you can drag it through another day of suspicion, superstition, and the faint hope that maybe one of your concoctions will do more than make you sick. Breakfast is not the highlight of your day. It is the first reminder that magic, at least in your life, never tastes good. The great illusion of wizardry begins not with fireballs or spells, but with the simple act of getting dressed. You probably picture robes flowing like river water, embroidered with silver stars, perhaps a staff leaning nearby, and a tall pointed hat waiting on its hook like a crown. Forget that. The real morning ritual is closer to the sad process of dragging yourself into yesterday's clothes and pretending they don't reek of smoke, sweat, and whatever unholy mixture you spilled during your last experiment. You roll out of your straw mattress, scratch at a flea bite, and stare at the heap of fabric in the corner that passes for your wardrobe. It's not mystical. It's misery with seams. You own exactly one tunic, maybe two if you're fortunate, both made from coarse wool that scratches every inch of exposed skin like a vengeful cat. Wool is the fabric of survival in a damp, drafty world, but it is also the sworn enemy of comfort. The sleeves are uneven from too many repairs, the hem is scorched from leaning too close to a candle, and somewhere near the collar there's a stain that will never come out. No matter how many times you scrub it with lye or mutter prayers over the bucket, you don't get to rotate outfits like a noble. You get to wear the same thing until it rots off your body, and by the looks of it, that might be soon. You drag the tunic over your head, wincing as the fabric scratches against your skin already raw from too many flea bites. It clings unhelpfully, heavy with old sweat, the faint tang of urine from failed alchemical distillations, and the unmistakable scent of smoke embedded into every fiber. It's not the good kind of smoke either, not incense or campfire. This is the sharp, acrid smoke of burning sulfur and scorched parchment, of failed experiments and singed hair. Anyone standing downwind of you will know exactly what you are, not because you look like a wizard, but because you smell like one, a walking chimney of bad ideas. As for trousers, you've got the medieval equivalent of linen sacks tied with cord. They're patched at the knees, worn thin at the thighs and stiff at the edges where something unidentifiable spilled and dried into a crust. You try not to think about it. When you lace them up, the cord bites into your waist, leaving you feeling both restrained and unsupported at the same time. Shoes? If you own a pair, they're little more than leather stitched, badly enough to let water seep in and stones jab your feet. The soles are thinning, and every step feels like a new argument with gravity. Most days, you just go barefoot, because what's the point? You're already shuffling through filth on the floor of your hut. Might as well bring the outside world in. And then, the hands. Wizards are supposed to be elegant finger waggers, masters of gestures that command fire and storm. In reality, your fingers are permanently stained black with ink from copying manuscripts late into the night. The nails are cracked, dirt packed beneath them, and faint burns mark the tips from where you reached into a pan too soon or brushed against a hot crucible. Your hands don't look like they weave spells. They look like they've lost a brawl with a goose quill in a coal stove. No one would mistake them for instruments of cosmic power. They're just calloused reminders that wizardry is 90% scribbling, boiling, and hoping nothing explodes. What about the famous pointy hat? That's the cruelest lie of all. No hat greets you in the morning. No cone of velvet dusted with constellations. That was a later fantasy, dreamed up by artists who had never seen a real practitioner drag himself out of bed. Your head is bare, your hair a disaster. Bedhead is your crown, wild tufts shooting out in every direction as if they too have been electrified by some unstable experiment. Grease holds the strands together in clumps, and there's probably a feather, twig, or crumb stuck in there depending on how restless the night was. When you catch sight of yourself in the warped bronze mirror hanging by the wall, you don't see a sorcerer. You see a scarecrow who's lost the will to scare. The finishing touches of your ensemble aren't jewelry or enchanted amulets. They're belts patched from scraps of leather, pouches that sag under the weight of chalk, dried herbs, and the occasional suspicious vial. Every pouch smells like a different mistake. Crushed sage, spoiled wine, sulfur crystals that flake into your seams. The cords creak, the stitching frays, and if you lean too far forward, half the contents spill to the floor in a clatter that sounds nothing like power and everything like embarrassment. You scoop them back up quickly, hoping no one saw, though the only witnesses are the rats. There is no glamour in this process, no transformation into the mysterious figure of legend. You don't stand taller in your garments. You stoop, already tired. You don't feel more powerful. You feel itchy, grimy, and slightly nauseous. Dressing doesn't make you a wizard. It makes you look like what you are, a weary scholar, part tinkerer, part fraud, smelling faintly of onions and ash. If anything, the locals who glimpse you shuffle past with narrowed eyes, muttering to each other. They don't see wisdom in your rough robe. They see danger in the stains they don't want to identify. And yet, when you're finally dressed, you tell yourself, this is what sets you apart. Everyone else wears the same rough wool, but only yours carries the faint mark of burnt experiments, the faded ink of secret texts, the smell of risks no farmer would take. To them, it's filth. To you, it's proof that you're trying. You hitch up your belt, wipe your ink-stained hands on the side of your tunic, and prepare to shuffle into the day. You may not look like the paintings in storybooks. You may look like a madman who lost a fight with a barrel of soot. But in a way, that's more accurate, because real wizardry isn't about looking magical. It's about being stubborn enough to keep putting on the same scratchy clothes every morning and insisting there's something more to the world than the smell of smoke in your sleeves. Your day job isn't casting fireballs or summoning demons. It's crouching over a smoky hearth with watery eyes, trying not to inhale too deeply while you stir a bubbling concoction that promises wealth and immortality, but usually delivers nausea and poverty. Welcome to alchemy, the wizard's 9-to-5 grind, the noble pursuit of turning lead into gold, discovering the philosopher's stone, and unlocking the eternal mysteries of nature. It sounds grand. In practice, it's one long series of burns, breakages, and unpaid debts. You don't stride confidently into your workshop like a master of secrets. You shuffle in, cough once or twice through the haze of old smoke, and pray today's experiment doesn't kill you faster than starvation will. The tools of your trade are not sleek instruments of precision, but whatever glassware, pottery, and warped metal you can scavenge. Crucibles cracked from too many firings. Glass vessels clouded with residues you couldn't wash out if you tried. Iron tongs bent and rusted. Charcoal that burns unevenly and threatens to suffocate you in your own shack. You arrange them like a surgeon about to perform a life-saving operation. Only instead of saving anyone, you're boiling down urine because someone told you there's gold hidden in it if you just distill it long enough. The first lesson of alchemy is patience. The second is disappointment. The third is how to recognize the smell of your own eyebrows burning. Lead is your constant companion. Dull, heavy, unyielding lead. You scrape at it, melt it, pound it, dissolve it in dubious solutions, all in the eternal hope that it will transform into something shinier, nobler, and infinitely more valuable. The dream is transmutation. The reality is a room full of blackened lumps and crusty powders that look like the aftermath of a failed bakery. You tell yourself you're close, that the philosopher's stone could be just one more attempt away. But the truth hangs in the smoke. If centuries of men smarter and richer than you haven't cracked it, what makes you think you will, with your cracked beakers and borrowed coal? The fumes are half the battle. Sulfur chokes the air, acrid and eggy. Mercury glistens in shallow dishes. A tempting, liquid silver that dribbles between your fingers and poisons you slowly every time you touch it. Niter hisses when sprinkled into the flame. The mixture of smells clings to your hair, your clothes, your very skin. You become a walking advertisement for why no one should come too close to a wizard. The headaches throb, your stomach flips, your lungs ache with each breath, and still, you keep going. Because what if, just once, the bubbling crucible doesn't explode in your face, but instead reveals the secret that will make you rich, respected, and maybe immortal? You read old texts, scrawled in Latin, Greek, or worse, half-deciphered gibberish from a man who swore he found his wisdom in a dream. You copy diagrams of furnaces and alembics by candlelight, trying to make sense of recipes that call for ingredients no sane person could acquire. Dragon's blood? Likely resin from a tree. Unicorn horn? Probably ground narwhal tusk, smuggled through dubious hands. Phoenix ash? Try soot from your own chimney. The recipes are riddles, wrapped in metaphors, so you're never quite sure if you're boiling the right liquid or just wasting another week on nonsense. And yet the secrecy makes you feel special, chosen, like you're on the cusp of unlocking a language the universe wrote just for you. But the universe rarely writes in your favor. Instead, it laughs when the glass vessel you've been heating suddenly cracks, spewing molten metal across the table. You flinch back, arms stinging, your robe now dotted with holes where drops burned straight through the wool. That's another garment ruined. Another scar added to your hands. If your neighbors didn't already think you were possessed, the sight of you staggering into the daylight, coughing, hair singed, and skin dotted with fresh burns would convince them. The town whispers that you make explosions for fun. The truth is that the explosions are the only thing that ever really works. And yet, despite the poverty, the headaches, the hunger, you keep at it. You tell yourself that one successful experiment will make all the suffering worth it. Maybe you won't find gold, but you might stumble on a new pigment for artists or a solvent that cleans metal better than anything before. Sometimes the accidents lead to something useful. Gunpowder, for example, wasn't meant to be a weapon of war. It was a byproduct of someone, somewhere, chasing immortality. Every bang, every crackle of sparks, could be a discovery, even if you're too poor to profit from it. That hope is the only thing stronger than the stench of sulfur. But let's not pretend it's all noble sacrifice. Sometimes, alchemy is just fraud. If you're clever, you can stage a transmutation, slipping in a sliver of gold foil when no one's looking, convincing a patron that your experiment worked. A generous noble might then fund your work for another few months, and you can eat something besides stale bread dipped in onion soup. The risk, of course, is that when he realizes you've scammed him, he won't just cut your funding, he might cut your fingers, or worse. The line between genius and charlatan is thinner than parchment, and you walk it daily with trembling steps. When the day stretches long, and the sun dips low outside your smoky hut, you sit back, exhausted, head pounding, clothes reeking of ash. The table is littered with broken shards of glass, charred wood, and half-finished experiments. Your stomach growls, your eyes blur, your lungs feel heavy. You have nothing to show for 12 hours of labor, except another batch of sludge and a stronger cough. You tell yourself that tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow, you'll make the breakthrough. Tomorrow, lead will become gold. But the truth presses down on you like the weight of the lead itself. The only thing you've really mastered is the art of keeping hope alive in the middle of despair, of convincing yourself that poverty, smoke, and endless failure are signs of progress, not proof that you've wasted your life. Wizards in stories wear gleaming robes and wield staffs of power. Wizards in reality reek of sulfur, stagger under debts, and cling to dreams that burn out faster than their candles. And still, despite it all, you return to the fire. Because even if it kills you, the pursuit of impossible gold feels like the only thing worth dying for. The night sky is your second workshop, a vast ceiling of shifting lights that everyone from kings to peasants believes hides the secrets of their lives. You're not just a wizard with jars of sludge and singed hair. You're also an interpreter of the heavens, a translator of starlight into destiny. Forget glowing crystal balls and booming voices of prophecy. Your tools are wax-stained charts, ink-blotted parchments, and a memory crammed with the names of constellations that never look like the things they're supposed to. You squint at the sky, trace invisible lines between faint sparks of light, and declare that a noble's fortune depends on whether Mars happened to be hanging around Aquarius when he was born. It sounds impressive enough to get you invited to dinner. It also sounds like enough of a gamble to get you thrown out when your predictions don't come true. Astrology is equal parts science, storytelling, and survival. On one hand, you're cataloging celestial movements with painstaking detail, marking down eclipses, conjunctions, and retrogrades, like a diligent clerk of the universe. On the other, you're spinning those observations into tales about love, war, crops, and death that people desperately want to believe. A nobleman wants assurance that his newborn son will inherit not just land, but luck. A merchant wants to know if the stars favor a long journey. A young woman wants to hear that her marriage will bring joy instead of sorrow. You nod solemnly, consult your charts, and mutter about Jupiter's influence. Then you hand them whatever hope they're paying for. The money can be good, at least compared to selling jars of dubious elixirs to peasants. Wealthy patrons enjoy the mystique of a personal astrologer. They picture you communing with the heavens, not hunched over in a smoky corner, tongue sticking out as you struggle to calculate planetary orbits with arithmetic so clumsy a village child could point out your mistakes. But the beauty of astrology isn't accuracy, it's performance. You deliver predictions with enough confidence that no one questions whether your ruler slipped while drawing circles on your parchment. And when you're wrong, as you almost always are, you have an excuse ready. The stars are mysterious after all. Perhaps you misread the timing. Perhaps Mars shifted its mood. Perhaps the gods intervened. It's never your fault. It's the cosmos being coy. But the real danger lies in getting too close to power. Predict the future for a farmer, and if you're wrong, he grumbles and forgets about it. Predict the future for a duke, and suddenly, You're staking your neck on whether his military campaign succeeds. If it doesn't, he won't blame poor planning, underfed soldiers, or an enemy's cunning. He'll blame you, the wizard who told him that Venus smiled on his ambitions. That smile becomes a sneer, and you become expendable. One failed prophecy, and your body might end up floating in the moat, while another, wise man, takes your place. Still, you keep at it, because the work has its rewards. There's a thrill in watching the stars wheel above you, their steady patterns indifferent to human chaos. You memorize the rising of Orion, the slow crawl of Saturn, the blood-red gleam of Mars, and you feel, for a moment, like you're part of something greater. You pretend you can read destiny in their glow, but deep down, maybe you believe a little too. After all, you need comfort as much as your clients do. If the stars can promise them wealth and love, maybe they can promise you that tomorrow won't end in ruin. But astrology also carries suspicion. To the church, the heavens are God's design, not your ledger. Too much stargazing and chart-making can brand you a heretic, a meddler trying to steal divine secrets. Monks scowl when they catch you sketching constellations, priests thunder about hubris, and inquisitors are always eager for another neck to stretch. You protest that you're not summoning demons, just studying the firmament, but they see little difference. The line between scholar and sorcerer is thinner than the crescent moon. On quiet nights, when patrons have gone home satisfied and no one's threatening to burn you, you sit under the stars alone. The world around you is damp and filthy, full of suspicion and hunger, but above it all the sky glitters with impossible beauty. You know the names of each bright point, the myths of each constellation, and you whisper them to yourself like prayers. Maybe you can't really predict the future. Maybe the stars don't care about you at all. But in their cold, steady glow, you find a strange kind of magic, one that no nobleman's coin and no priest's condemnation can take away. And when morning comes, you roll up your star charts, blow out your candle, and prepare for another day of pretending certainty in a world where nothing is certain. You'll sell another prophecy, trace another constellation, and hope that when your predictions fail, it's only your pride that suffers, not your neck. Because being a wizard means always balancing between awe and danger, wonder and fraud, starlight and shadow. And in that balance, somehow, you survive. If you thought a wizard's power came from chanting spells or waving a staff, you'd be sorely disappointed the moment you step into his garden. Here, among crooked rows of herbs and weeds that look indistinguishable to the untrained eye, lies his true arsenal. Forget fireballs. The wizard's real weapons are sprigs of rosemary, bundles of wormwood, roots dug up by moonlight, and jars of dried plants whose labels have long since faded. To the desperate peasant at the door, this collection is hope incarnate. To the wizard himself, it's equal parts pharmacy, poison cabinet, and hedge against starvation when all else fails. The line between medicine and sorcery is about as thin as the skin of an onion. And that's fitting, because onions are one of the first things a wizard will reach for when asked to cure anything from toothaches to demons in the belly. Poultices, teas, and tinctures are the bread and butter of wizardly healing. A poultice of garlic might be slapped on a festering wound, a tea of sage brewed for a fever, or a tincture of valerian given to calm nerves. Some of these actually work, at least a little. Most of them taste awful, smell worse, and occasionally have side effects that make the patient wonder if the illness wasn't kinder. But in an age where the nearest physician is a barber with a rusty knife, the wizard's herbs are better than nothing. Usually, your wizardly reputation depends on knowing what to pluck, when to pluck it, and how to disguise your ignorance when someone demands a cure you don't have. Herbs are harvested by moonlight for potency, or at least that's what you claim while crouching in the damp grass trying to pry dandelion roots out of the ground with numb fingers. The timing of the harvest is as much performance as science. You mumble about auspicious nights, planetary alignments, and sacred hours, when really, you're just trying not to fall into the pigsty while cutting nettles. By morning, the gathered bundle looks impressive enough. Tie it up with a bit of twine, hang it from your rafters, and you suddenly look like a sage rather than a weedy scavenger. The problem is, healing isn't as simple as applying the right leaf. Every village expects miracles, and you're working with a limited palette of weeds, roots, and the occasional dead toad. You mash things into pastes, smear them on skin, and hope the swelling goes down before anyone asks for their money back. Sometimes it works. A bit of willow bark tea can ease pain, though no one calls it aspirin yet. Honey mixed into salves can fight infection. Mint settles stomachs, fennel relieves gas, and elderberries might even fend off fevers. Other times, the treatment is more theatrical than medicinal. You might burn a sprig of juniper to banish evil spirits, or tie a bag of herbs around someone's neck as a charm against sickness. Whether it helps or not doesn't matter, so long as they believe it will. But the garden's bounty is a double-edged sword. The same patch of earth that grows your healing plants also breeds your poisons. Belladonna lurks with its glossy berries, beautiful and deadly. Hemlock hides among the harmless weeds, a stalk of quiet execution waiting to be brewed into someone's medicine. Even common herbs can be dangerous in the wrong doses. A little wormwood might soothe the stomach. Too much and you're convulsing on the floor. This is the true power of the wizard's lore. The ability to decide, with a handful of dried leaves, whether a concoction heals or harms. It's a heavy responsibility, though some wizards find ways to turn it into a tidy business when revenge seekers come calling in the night. And then there's the question of smell. A wizard's home reeks like a compost heap married a brewery. The air is thick with boiling decoctions of nettles and mugwort, with smoke from smoldering herbs meant to purify the space. Jars of pickled roots, dried blossoms, and animal bits line the shelves, each one adding its own unique note to the olfactory assault. When you prepare a healing draft, it's rarely just the patient's illness being tested. It's their stomach, their gag reflex, and their willingness to swallow something that tastes like liquefied barn floor mixed with candle soot. To the villagers, you're either savior or swindler. They whisper that you can cure plague with a poultice or summon storms with a sprig of basil. They never quite trust you, because every cure carries a price, and every potion is just as likely to kill as to heal. Still, when their child is feverish, or their neighbor's leg has gone black with infection, they come knocking at your crooked door. They don't want science. They want hope, bottled in clay jars and tied up in herbs. You give them what you can, praying it works, but knowing that sometimes the only cure is luck. Of course, the church frowns upon your green-stained hands. Healing with herbs smells too much like witchcraft, especially when you mutter incantations while grinding them in your mortar. You insist it's just a habit, a rhythm to help the work along, but suspicion sticks like mud. One wrong cure, one death too many, and suddenly you're not a healer but a poisoner, dragged before a tribunal to explain why God's will looks so much like your incompetence. You can't win. Too successful, and you're feared. Too many failures, and you're condemned. And yet, the garden remains. Each season brings its own harvest, its own desperate promises. Spring is nettles and violets, summer bursts with mint and fennel, autumn brings roots, and winter leaves you scraping lichen off rocks and praying you don't poison yourself by mistake. The wizard's garden is never just plants. It's a gamble, a living pharmacy where knowledge, faith, and desperation grow side by side. So when dawn breaks and you shuffle outside to check your rows of scraggly greens, you're not just tending herbs, you're tending survival, your own and everyone else's. Each leaf is a question, each root a test. Will this heal? Will this harm? Will this be the thing that finally proves you're worth the title of wizard, or the thing that gets you hanged? Because in the end, your garden is both your pride and your peril. It feeds, it heals, it kills, and it defines you. And every time a villager drinks your bitter brew, you hold your breath, waiting to see which way fate tilts. Books are the heart of your supposed wisdom, though they are far rarer and far less magical than anyone wants to believe. You don't have shelves groaning with leather-bound tomes glittering with runes. What you have is a pitiful collection of battered manuscripts, borrowed or stolen, copied and recopied, until the ink has bled into a blur. Each page smells of smoke, tallow, and damp air. You spread them across your desk like treasures, but in truth, half of them are so illegible you spend more time guessing at words than reading them. And the language? Mostly Latin, with occasional scraps of Greek or Arabic, all of it filtered through generations of scribes who had worse handwriting than you. Reading is an act of faith, not certainty. You trace a finger over a sentence, lips moving as you sound it out, and pray you're not mistranslating angelic blessing as, please feed the donkey. Copying these grimoires is the bulk of your work, the endless grind of ink, quill, and parchment. You dip your pen, scratch out letters until your wrist cramps, and curse when you blotch a word beyond recognition. The pages pile slowly, each one costing hours of labor and half a jar of ink. And the errors. There are always errors. Sometimes you skip a line by accident and don't realize until it's too late. Sometimes you misinterpret an abbreviation and turn an instruction about herbs into one about entrails. And then there are the moments when you get bored, when your mind drifts after staring at black ink on brown parchment for 6 hours. That's when the doodles creep in. A crude drawing of a demon with goat horns, a stick figure monk with a comically oversized nose, a grotesque little face peeking from the margins of a page that was supposed to hold divine wisdom. You laugh to yourself, imagining centuries later some scholar deciding your doodle was a coded sigil. The truth is, it was just boredom scratching through your quill. The books themselves are an odd mix of knowledge and nonsense. You'll find chapters on astrology, recipes for potions, diagrams of strange symbols, and passages lifted wholesale from the Bible, as if sprinkling scripture over a page of alchemy makes it safer. Sometimes the text gives useful instructions, like how to distill oils or preserve herbs. Other times it's gibberish cloaked in metaphor, warning you to seek the red lion in the belly of the black sun without offering the faintest clue what that means. You convince yourself it's symbolic, then realize you're simply staring at the failed poetry of a long-dead man. And always, there is the fear that knowledge itself is dangerous. Books can damn you as easily as they save you. If the wrong person catches you with a grimoire scribbled with alchemical symbols, they'll say it's proof of witchcraft. If they see diagrams of stars and planets, they'll say you've stolen secrets from heaven. You keep your texts hidden beneath planks in the floor or wrapped in rags in the corner, bringing them out only when you're sure no one is watching. Even then, you glance at the door every few minutes, half expecting a priest to burst in and drag you away. Reading is a crime you commit daily, penance measured in heartbeats of fear. But for all the risk, you can't stop. There is power in the written word, even when you don't fully understand it. A half-deciphered recipe can inspire a week of experiments. A fragment of philosophy can spin you into hours of contemplation. When you copy a page, even one riddled with errors, you feel like you're preserving something fragile and rare, something that might otherwise vanish into dust. Your handwriting might be shaky, your Latin shaky, your attention shaky, but the act itself ties you to a lineage of seekers who believed, however foolishly, that the universe could be captured in ink. Sometimes you imagine what future eyes might see in your work. They'll find your notes, your scribbles, your messy diagrams. Maybe they'll think you were brilliant. Maybe they'll think you were mad. They'll puzzle over the doodles, wondering if the grotesque demon in the corner was a warning, not realizing it was just you, exhausted, amusing yourself in the margins. And in a strange way, that's its own kind of magic. Because even if your potions never work, even if your stars never align, books remain. Your stains, your errors, your nonsense scrawled across vellum. A piece of you survives long after the smoke of your experiments fades. So you keep scratching away, candlelight flickering, lungs stinging from the fumes of tallow and ink. Every page is a battle between clarity and chaos, wisdom and boredom, faith and fraud. And when the quill finally drops from your hand and you slump against the table, you tell yourself it was worth it. That somewhere, buried under your mistakes and doodles, is knowledge that matters. Even if it's just one line, even if no one else ever finds it. Because for a wizard, secret knowledge isn't about mastery. It's about the stubborn belief that truth hides in the ink, waiting for someone foolish enough to keep looking. The floor creaks beneath your feet as you clear a patch of space in the middle of your hut, shoving aside jars of dried nettles, cracked crucibles, and that one suspicious skull you insist is for study. It isn't glamorous, this preparation. You sweep away dirt, chicken droppings, and the occasional spider nest, then bend down with a stick of chalk you had to barter for at the market. The villagers think you use it to draw talismans that summon storms. In truth, you're about to spend the next hour crouched over like a hunchback, trying to get a lopsided circle to look intimidating. Circles are everything, or at least, that's what the old books say. They're the barrier between you and whatever invisible force you're pretending to summon, the line that separates your fragile body from the creeping chaos outside. A demon can't cross a chalk line, they say. Neither can the devil, or so you hope, since your neighbors are already whispering that he drops by for tea. The circle is never just a circle. You scratch triangles, sigils, and half-remembered Hebrew letters you copied from a text that probably copied from another text that didn't know Hebrew either. Sometimes you throw in Greek squiggles because they look impressive, though you couldn't translate them if your life depended on it. The act itself is half art, half performance, a way of convincing yourself that lines on the floor will protect you from things that, deep down, you don't even believe exist. Still, you keep drawing, layering chalk until your knees ache. When you finally step back, the circle looks less like divine geometry and more like a drunk child's attempt at carpentry. But you don't admit that out loud. Instead, you mutter words under your breath, cobbled together from prayers, incantations, and the occasional nonsense syllable you invented on the spot. You say them not because they make sense, but because silence is worse. Silence makes you aware of the scratching in the walls and the wind rattling the shutters. Silence lets you remember that you are alone in a hut, surrounded by people who want you gone. When you perform a ritual, it's not for yourself alone. It's also for the villagers peeking through cracks in the shutters, holding their breath to see if you'll burst into flame. They want proof that you're either holy or damned, preferably damned, so they can drag you to the priest and wash their hands of you. The circle on the ground, the guttural chanting, the smoke rising from the brazier. This is theater, and you are both actor and audience. You pretend to control forces, they pretend to be afraid, and somewhere between the two lies the fragile illusion of power. And yet, as much as you know it's a show, there's always that sliver of doubt. What if the words you copied from that moldy grimoire really do mean something? What if the symbols scratched into the dirt accidentally invite something in rather than keeping it out? You've read enough stories of magicians devoured by their own summons to feel a shiver every time you light the candle at the circle's edge. The ritual begins with smoke, always smoke. You toss dried herbs, resins, or sometimes just whatever scraps you have into the brazier, and the air fills with an acrid haze that makes your eyes water. Frankincense if you're lucky, pig fat if you're not. You cough through the fumes, trying to look dignified while your lungs argue otherwise. Then comes the muttering, words strung together like beads on a broken thread. Fragments of psalms, names of angels half mangled in pronunciation, Greek that sounds more like bad singing. You say them rhythmically, letting the repetition hammer into your skull until you half believe the sound itself has power. Sometimes you rock back and forth. Sometimes you close your eyes and hope the dizziness is divine inspiration and not smoke inhalation. The truth is that rituals serve less as doorways to other worlds and more as barricades against this one. Every chalk line is an excuse not to face the fear that you're a fraud. Every muttered syllable is a shield against the suspicion that no one, not the villagers, not the priests, not you, it truly understands what any of this means. Yet people keep coming. They want charms for fertility, cures for illness, predictions for harvests. You can't say no, because saying no is admitting weakness, and weakness in your line of work is an engraved invitation to the stake. So you draw your circles, you chant your words, and you keep the illusion alive. And sometimes, strange things happen. The fire flickers suddenly when you say a name. A draft sweeps across the floor when the shutters are closed. A candle sputters out just as you demand a sign. Your rational mind whispers explanations. Wind, smoke, coincidence. But the other part of you, the tired, superstitious part that aches in the bones and stares at the stars too long, wonders if you brushed against something real. That fleeting fear keeps you coming back, chalk in hand, knees in the dirt, muttering at shadows. Because what if one day one of these rituals actually works? What if all the nonsense and fakery add up to something you can't explain? You erase the circle when you're done, sweeping chalk into a corner with trembling hands, trying to look calm. The villagers watching through the cracks whisper that you've just bound a demon, though all you bound was your own anxiety. You cough through the smoke, straighten your ink-stained tunic, and pretend the whole performance left you wiser. In truth, you feel drained, half sick from the fumes and half terrified of your own imagination. But the circle served its purpose. It kept the villagers cautious. It kept you busy. And for a moment, in the haze of chanting and chalk, it almost convinced you that you weren't just a scholar with bad handwriting and a nervous cough. You were a wizard, a man between worlds, a master of circles that protect you not from demons, but from the crushing weight of reality itself. Summoning a spirit always begins the same way, with fear thick enough to taste. The books talk about angels descending in brilliance, demons striding forth in clouds of sulfur, and voices that split the air with thunder. The reality is far quieter and far more terrifying. You sit hunched in the corner of your hut, or the cold nave of a ruined chapel, the only light flickering from stubs of tallow candles. The air is heavy with smoke from herbs you burned earlier. Juniper, if you had it, pig fat, if you didn't. And the smell clings to your skin like a second layer. Every creak of the rafters, every gust of wind against the shutter feels like an omen. You are not surrounded by celestial choirs or infernal trumpets. You are surrounded by silence, broken only by the sound of your own breathing. The rituals promise protection. You've drawn the circles, inscribed the names of archangels, muttered prayers in Latin that you only half understand. You clutch a book in one hand, your quill-scratched notes in the other, eyes darting between crooked letters and smudged diagrams. You know you've probably copied something wrong. A mistranslated word, a missing line, a demon's name spelled incorrectly. Maybe you've invited nothing at all. Or maybe you've invited everything. The weight of that uncertainty presses harder than any church sermon. And yet you proceed, because this is what makes a wizard a wizard. Anyone can grind herbs or scribble horoscopes. Only the bold or the desperate try to pierce the veil. You light another candle, murmur another invocation, and imagine the words taking shape in the air, like hooks cast into invisible waters. The smoke curls above you, thick and acrid, forming shapes that make you blink and rub your eyes. You remind yourself it's just the fumes. You don't really believe that the shadow crawling along the wall looks like a hand reaching for you. Your voice shakes as you call names you've read in grimoires: Michael, Raphael, Gabriel. Sometimes you dare whisper darker names, the ones scratched in the margins in crabbed handwriting, as though even the original author feared to write them. You say them softly, and when nothing happens, you say them louder. The sound bounces in the cramped space, and you feel foolish, like a child pretending to command the night. But then, a draft snuffs out one of the candles, and your stomach flips. Was it the wind? Or did something actually hear you? The truth is that summoning spirits is not about commanding them. It's about surviving the attempt. Every manual warns you not to trust what answers, not to believe the promises, not to let the circle be broken. The stories of those who failed are cautionary tales whispered by firelight. Men who vanished, men who raved in madness, men whose huts were found empty but reeking of sulfur. You tell yourself those are exaggerations, scare tactics meant to keep fools away from forbidden knowledge. But when the smoke thickens and your candle gutters low, you start to wonder if you'll become another story whispered by villagers who already believe you're cursed. Your hands tremble as you clutch your knife, the only weapon you have against beings that are supposed to be made of spirit. The blade is iron, and you've etched crude symbols into it with hours of labor. You pray that counts for something. You stare into the shadows beyond your chalk circle, daring something to appear, half hoping nothing does. You whisper bargains, promises of service, offerings of incense and prayer. Your throat goes dry, the silence grows heavier, your eyes sting from smoke and exhaustion. And then, something changes. Not a demon clawing its way from the ground, not an angel blazing with light, just a shift in the room. The hairs on your arms rise, and the air feels thick, like water pressing against your chest. The candle flames flicker all at once. Your heart pounds as though you've run for miles. You know it could just be your mind fraying under fear, but that doesn't matter. In that moment, you believe. You believe because the alternative, that you've risked your soul for nothing, is worse. You ask your questions. Sometimes the answers come as whispers in your own head, words that feel foreign yet familiar. Sometimes they come as dreams later that night, fevered visions you scrawl down by dawn. Sometimes there is no answer at all, and you're left muttering into smoke while your lungs ache. When the silence stretches too long, you dismiss the spirit, thank it for its presence, and sweep away the chalk lines with shaking hands. You tell yourself the ritual worked, even if nothing happened, because the fear itself was proof enough of power. When you step outside, blinking into daylight, you look like a ghost yourself. Your eyes are red, your skin pale, your clothes reeking of smoke. The neighbors avoid your gaze. They whisper to each other that you spent the night talking to devils, and you don't correct them. Better they believe you command spirits than know you spent the whole time terrified of shadows and the sound of your own voice echoing back at you. The truth is too pathetic to admit, and yet, despite the fear, despite the sickness that clings to you after long nights of smoke and muttering, you return to it again and again. Because what if, next time, the voice isn't just in your head? What if the flicker of shadow is more than candlelight? What if, just once, the smoke parts and something steps forward, something willing to trade knowledge for your trembling faith? You know it's madness. You know it could cost you everything. But still, you kneel, chalk in hand, candle lit, whispering names into the darkness. Because the life of a wizard isn't built on certainty. It's built on the hope that fear itself means you're close to touching the unseen. Being a wizard means you never eat alone, not because you're popular, but because there is always someone knocking on your door, someone clutching a purse of coins or a basket of eggs, someone desperate enough to believe you might be the only thing standing between them and disaster. Your hut may reek of sulfur and damp parchment, but to the desperate, it smells like hope. They come in two kinds: the powerful, who want the future, and the poor, who want relief. Both expect miracles, and both will turn on you the moment you fail to provide them. The nobles arrive first, always with more ceremony than sense. A messenger pounds at your door, demanding your presence in a hall that reeks of roasted meat and perfumed cloth. You shuffle in, hunched, ink-stained, still smelling faintly of goat tallow, and you're forced to stand before men and women who wear more silver in a single sleeve than you've seen in your entire life. They want prophecies. They want to know if their unborn heir will be strong, if their crops will yield, if their armies will win. They don't ask questions with simple answers. They ask you to look at the stars and pronounce destiny. So you lay out your charts, you mutter about Mars and Jupiter, and you invent certainty from ink and candlelight. The noble nods gravely, accepts your words as gospel, and rewards you with coin, food, or if you're lucky, a cloak that doesn't smell like mildew. But the reward is poisoned, because when their heir sickens, when their harvest fails, when their army stumbles, they will not blame chance. They will blame you. You know the stories. The astrologer who predicted victory and was hanged when the battle was lost. The alchemist who swore he could make gold and found himself chained in a dungeon when he failed. To serve the powerful is to play dice with your life. Every word you utter before a noble has to be wrapped in careful ambiguity, enough to impress them, but vague enough to explain away later. You talk of great trials before triumph, of the influence of Saturn bringing hardship before glory. You spin riddles, because riddles can always be bent to fit the outcome. But even riddles don't always save you. A noble's patience is thin, and fear of betrayal burns hotter than gratitude. You walk into their halls with your head bowed, and you leave with it still attached only if fortune is kind. The farmers, though, are different. They don't want destiny. They want their cows to stop dying. They want their fevers cured. They want their children to breathe through the night. They knock quietly, as if ashamed, slipping into your smoky hut with hats in hand and eyes full of suspicion. They place their offerings on your table, bread, onions, sometimes a live chicken, and beg you for a cure. You rummage through your jars and herbs, tie together a bundle of sage, brew a tea that tastes like dirt, smear a poultice that stinks of vinegar and garlic onto their skin. They sip, gag, swallow. Sometimes they get better, sometimes they don't. And when they don't, they whisper that you are in league with devils, that your remedies poison instead of heal. You are a last resort, nothing more. They come when the priest's prayers have failed, when the barber's knife has failed, when hope itself is failing. If you succeed, you are a miracle worker. If you fail, you are a curse. There is no middle ground. And then there are the ones who come in secret, the desperate, the terrified, the ones who won't even admit they've stepped through your door. A woman begging for a charm to keep her husband from beating her. A soldier clutching a scrap of cloth, asking for protection before marching to war. A merchant's wife who whispers about fertility while blushing crimson. They slip you coins, never enough, and demand something you cannot promise. You give them trinkets, bundles of herbs tied with string, scraps of parchment scrawled with symbols you barely understand, powders that glitter only because you mixed in ground glass. They leave clutching these tokens as if they are salvation itself. Sometimes the mere belief is enough to soothe them. Sometimes it isn't. But what choice do they have? And what choice do you? This is the social side of wizardry. Everyone wants something from you, but no one truly trusts you. They believe just enough to risk their coin, and they doubt just enough to damn you when things go wrong. You live in a perpetual performance, forced to look wise, to speak slowly, to never admit ignorance. You can never say, "I don't know." You can never say, "That's beyond me." The moment you do, they will see the cracks, and they will remember the sermons about false prophets and witches. Better to lie than to be honest. Better to mumble about Saturn's influence than to confess that you are as helpless as they are. The irony is that you want to help. You study, you mix, you read by candlelight until your eyes blur because you hope there is truth in all this madness. You want to ease pain, to discover secrets, to prove that you are more than a fraud. But your life is a tightrope strung between expectation and failure, and the crowd below is eager to see you fall. The nobles will smile at you until the day they don't. The farmers will thank you until the day their child dies. The desperate will whisper prayers over your charms until the day they fail. And then the mob will come with torches, certain that the problem was never the stars or the sickness but you. So you keep your head down. You mutter in riddles, measure your herbs carefully, and never promise too much. You accept the coins and eggs and chickens because without them you'd starve. You live with the fear because without it you'd already be dead. Everyone wants answers, and you give them what you can. But you know the truth. The truth is that wizardry isn't about commanding forces or reading destinies. It's about surviving other people's desperation long enough to make it through another day. The life of a wizard is lived under a shadow, and it isn't cast by the moon or the stars you so obsessively track. It's the shadow of accusation, the constant awareness that every word you mutter, every jar you carry, every symbol you scratch into the dirt might be the one that convinces someone you've stepped too far into the devil's territory. You live in a world where the line between learned man and heretic is so thin it can vanish overnight. One day you're being asked to read the heavens for a noble's heir. The next you're being dragged in chains to explain why your herbs smell more like witchcraft than medicine. It's not about guilt or innocence. It's about suspicion. And suspicion is a fire that spreads faster than truth. The paranoia begins with whispers. A child gets sick after drinking your potion, and suddenly the neighbors are muttering about curses. A woman's cow drops dead in the field, and they remember how you walked past her gate the day before. A storm ruins the harvest, and it is easier to blame the man who charts the stars than to admit the world is cruel and indifferent. You know these whispers well, because they drift under your door at night, seeping in with the smoke from your hearth. You hear them when you walk through the market, voices dropping low as you pass, eyes glancing away, hands making the sign of the cross. At first, you try to ignore it. You bury yourself in your work, grind your herbs, chart your constellations, draw your circles with extra care. But ignoring it doesn't help, because paranoia isn't just theirs. It becomes yours. Every knock at the door makes your heart jump. Every shout in the street makes you wonder if they're coming for you. You start to measure your words carefully, never saying too much, never correcting a priest, never admitting that your books hold secrets older than the parish itself. You live with your tongue half bitten and your head half bowed, hoping no one notices the candlelight flickering in your hut past midnight. And then there's the Inquisition. You don't have to see them to feel their presence. Their reach is long, their patience short. They don't need proof, only suspicion. And once suspicion hardens into accusation, you're already halfway to the stake. You've heard stories of scholars pulled from their desks, their libraries burned, their bodies stretched until joints snapped like twigs. You've heard of women drowned for charms no stronger than a bag of fennel tied with string. You tell yourself it won't happen to you, but the truth gnaws at you whenever you hear of a tribunal convening in the next town over. It could be you tomorrow. One wrong word, one wrong look, one wrong prediction, and the questioners will be waiting. The cruelest part is that your work itself is the evidence. The very things you cling to for survival are the same things that damn you. The jars of dried herbs, they look like ingredients for curses. The charts of stars, they look like invitations to demons. The strange words you mutter under your breath, they sound like spells, even when they're nothing more than bad Latin. The scratches on your floor, the smoke from your brazier, the smell of sulfur on your clothes. Proof, they'll say, that you're not a man of study but a servant of hell. And once they've decided that, no amount of protest will save you. You live in constant calculation, performing the dance of appearing useful, but not too powerful, wise, but not too strange. If you cure a child's fever, you thank God loudly, so no one thinks it was your hand alone. If you predict rain and it arrives, you insist it was luck, not mastery, so no one fears you control the weather. You survive by balancing between being respected enough to feed yourself and mistrusted enough that no one dares to kill you outright. It's a miserable balance, a seesaw over a pit, and you know the longer you walk it, the greater the chance you'll fall. What gnaws at you most isn't the fear of fire or chains, but the knowledge that it doesn't take much. You could be innocent, cautious, careful, and still, someone's grief or anger could decide your fate. A noble whose campaign fails, a farmer whose child dies despite your herbs, a priest who sees your books as rivals to his sermons. Their words are enough. Once the accusation is spoken, it grows teeth. It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. All that matters is that people believe it, and belief is stronger than truth. So you live with paranoia as your constant companion. You smile when spoken to, nod when insulted, bow your head when priests pass. You burn your candles low, never letting too much light escape your window. You hide your more dangerous texts in cracks in the walls, or beneath the floor where only rats can see them. And yet, you know it's not enough. Nothing is enough. The suspicion is always there, waiting like dry tinder for a spark. And one day, that spark will come. You'll hear the knock at your door, not from a client or a beggar, but from men in robes with questions that are not questions. And you'll know, even before they speak, that your life has been weighed and found wanting. Because in the end, wizardry isn't about magic at all. It's about surviving the constant threat that the world doesn't want you to exist. And the truth, the one you never say aloud, is that survival is the most fragile spell of all. If you thought being a wizard meant you were the lone keeper of forbidden wisdom, you'd be sorely mistaken. The world is littered with men just like you, scratching at parchment, boiling herbs, squinting at stars, all of them convinced they've discovered truths no one else dares touch. Some are scholars cloistered in monasteries, others are street hustlers who juggle tricks for coins, and a few are outright frauds who couldn't tell salt from sulfur, but know how to talk loudly enough to fool a crowd. You share the same reputation whether you like it or not. To the villagers, you're all magicians, lumped together in one suspicious category that covers everything from serious astrology to card tricks. Rivalry is inevitable. Among the learned, rivalries burn hottest. You sit in a drafty corner of a monastery library, painstakingly copying a text, only to learn that some other scholar in a neighboring town has written the same thing but improved. He's left scathing notes in the margins, mocking earlier interpretations, sometimes yours, sometimes someone else's. His handwriting may be more elegant, his Latin smoother, but the knowledge is the same, borrowed and reborrowed, until it's hard to tell who first thought of it. You grind your teeth because he'll be remembered as insightful, while your errors will be laughed at centuries later by anyone who can still read your script. Knowledge doesn't belong to individuals. It's stolen, copied, twisted, and repackaged endlessly. You spend as much energy protecting scraps of information as you do actually learning. And yet, secrecy is an illusion. Every secret formula for gold, every star chart, every list of herbs has been passed around so many times that it's impossible to know whose it was to begin with. Wizards hoard knowledge like dragons hoard treasure, but they can't stop leaking it out through apprentices, manuscripts, and sheer pride. You've seen rivals puff up their chests in taverns, boasting of their new discovery, only for that discovery to appear in someone else's notes a week later. It's less a community of scholars than a pack of dogs snarling over the same bone. Then there are the con men. They dress in gaudy clothes, with rings stacked on their fingers and trinkets dangling from their belts. They sell elixirs, to peasants that are little more than colored water, boasting loudly in the market square while you shrink in your hut with your actual jars of herbs and powders. The worst part? They're often more successful than you. Their performances dazzle, their lies are bolder. And when the concoction inevitably fails, they've already moved on to the next town, pockets jingling with coins. Meanwhile, you're left behind to explain why your carefully brewed potion doesn't work fast enough or why your predictions weren't spectacular. They taint the very word wizard, making you seem like part of the same racket. And maybe you are, though you won't admit it out loud. The street magicians are another breed entirely. They stand in marketplaces juggling knives, pulling coins from children's ears, letting pigeons flutter out of their sleeves. They call themselves magicians, and though they claim no divine or demonic power, the villagers blur the line anyway. To them, what difference is there between a man who pulls fire from his hand through clever tricks and you, coughing over a brazier in your hut? Both are strange. Both unsettle. Both, in the end, could be witches. You despise them for their tricks, for cheapening the mystery that costs you your health and reputation, but you also envy them. Their craft brings laughter. Yours brings fear. Academic rivalries are subtler, but no less vicious. Letters fly between towns, full of polite insults, masked in flowery language. My learned colleague is mistaken, one line begins, before descending into a tirade about planetary motions. Some scholars dedicate entire manuscripts to proving another wrong. The public never cares about these squabbles, but to you, they're everything. Your reputation depends on not being dismissed as a fool by your peers. A single sarcastic remark from a respected rival can undo years of work. So you sharpen your quills and sharpen your insults, leaving your own scathing notes in the margins, imagining the satisfaction when your rival sees them. In the end, your debates aren't about truth. They're about pride. And sometimes, rivals turn dangerous. A failed prediction that embarrasses a noble can become a weapon in another wizard's hands. Whispers start. Did you hear? He called for rain, and the fields dried to dust. Your rival spreads the rumor, smiles at the noble's table, and offers his own services. The noble listens, because wizards are disposable. Today it's you, tomorrow it's him. And when his prediction fails, someone else will step forward to replace him. You aren't colleagues. You're carrion birds, circling the same scraps of patronage, ready to peck each other's eyes out for a chance at survival. What binds all of you, scholars, frauds, conjurers, is the act of pretending to know more than you do, pretending to hold secrets no one else has, pretending to stand closer to truth than the rest. But you know better. You know that every spell, every chart, every jar of herbs has passed through countless hands. Nothing is original. Nothing is yours alone. Even the symbols you etch into your floor were copied from someone who copied them from someone else. And still, you guard them as though they were priceless. Because the illusion of ownership is the only thing that separates you from the trickster in the marketplace or the scholar with prettier handwriting. So you live with rivals always at your back, con men always in your shadow, tricksters always mocking your craft. You hate them, envy them, and sometimes become them. Because wizardry isn't a brotherhood. It's a brawl fought with ink, smoke, and desperation, everyone clawing for scraps of power in a world that never truly believes in you. The only secret worth keeping is this. None of you know what you're doing, but as long as you act like you do, maybe, just maybe, you'll survive longer than the rest. Of all the services people demand from you, none come more often, or more awkwardly, than love. Not the grand, noble love of epic tales, but the desperate, sweaty, sometimes pathetic kind that keeps men and women up at night, whispering your name in secret. They don't come asking about philosophy or the movements of the planets. They come clutching a coin in one hand and a scrap of hair in the other, eyes eyes darting nervously as they beg you to make someone notice them, desire them, stay with them. It doesn't matter if you warn them that love is a slippery thing no spell can trap. They don't hear it. They only hear what they want. That maybe you have a vial, a charm, a powder that can turn rejection into passion, and you oblige, because how can you not? They come so often that love magic becomes your most reliable trade, even if you know it's nonsense. You shuffle through your herbs, muttering about ancient recipes, when really, you're just choosing whatever you have the most of. Rosemary, mint, maybe a sprinkle of powdered rose petals if you're lucky enough to have them. Sometimes you mix in honey for sweetness. Sometimes you grind up nettles for fire. Always you hand over a little pouch tied with twine or a vial of cloudy liquid and tell them to slip it into wine or wear it around the neck. You keep your voice low, your tone serious, because half the magic is in the performance. They nod gravely, clutch their purchase like it's the key to salvation, and walk away lighter, convinced the charm will work. But you know it won't. At least, not in the way they think. No herb or powder can make someone fall in love. What they can do is give the hopeful buyer the confidence to act differently, to smile when they would have sulked, to speak when they would have stayed silent. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the very belief in magic works better than any potion. And when it doesn't, when the object of affection still spurns them, the blame doesn't land on themselves, it lands on you. They come back, demanding to know why the charm failed, why the potion didn't inflame passion but only caused a stomachache. You mutter excuses about the wrong moon phase or the need for a stronger ingredient, and sometimes they believe you enough to pay again. Other times, they leave angry, muttering that you're a fraud. But they'll be back, or someone else will. Because love is an illness no one stops trying to cure. The requests are endless and often absurd. A married man wants his mistress to stay faithful, while his wife asks for a charm to make him less lustful. A widow wants her neighbor to finally notice her, though he's more concerned with his goats. A girl barely out of childhood begs you to make the boy down the road marry her, while his mother comes the next day, demanding a charm to keep him safe from witches. You nod to all of them, never letting your expression slip, though inside you marvel at the sheer volume of human desperation. People fear sickness, they fear hunger, they fear demons, but nothing terrifies them more than being unloved. You know, too, that your love potions are dangerous, not because they actually work, but because people want them to. Some slip powders into drinks, convinced it will make the stubborn girl in the corner smile back. When it doesn't, and when the victim instead vomits or collapses, the blame once again circles back to you. Others come asking for stronger charms, whispers about binding not just hearts but bodies. That's when things grow darker. You've read of spells that use blood, fingernails, even grave dirt. You've seen men try them, convinced they could force devotion. You've seen the results. Obsession, fear, hatred. Because nothing poisons love faster than trying to conjure it like smoke. And yet, you keep selling. Because what choice do you have? Love magic is the closest thing to steady work you'll ever know. Nobles may turn on you, peasants may distrust you, but lovers always come back. They don't care if the potion tastes foul or the charm stinks of garlic. They care only about hope, and you provide it bottled, wrapped, and tied with string. Sometimes you almost convince yourself you're helping. Sometimes, when two people come back to you smiling, swearing the potion worked, you allow yourself the smallest flicker of pride. But you know the truth. The potion didn't make them love each other. It only gave them an excuse to believe it possible. There are moments of humor in it too, though you never laugh out loud. A farmer begging for a charm to keep his wife interested, while she's at your door the next day asking for one to make him less insistent. A noblewoman whispering about passion, while her husband, only a hall away, hires you for something to strengthen his back. The irony piles up so thick it could smother you. You learn quickly that love magic isn't about romance. It's about lies, about disguising insecurity with powder and parchment. And you're the one who sells the disguise. Still, every time someone hands you a coin and whispers for a potion, you feel the same twinge of unease. Because if there's anything more dangerous than a failed prophecy or a bad cure, it's meddling in the messy, unpredictable tangle of desire. When a cure fails, people grieve. When a prophecy fails, people rage. But when love fails, when a charm doesn't bind, when a potion doesn't inflame, when a heart remains stubbornly cold, people do desperate things. They turn cruel, they turn violent, and sometimes they turn on you. But the requests never stop, and you never stop filling them. A pinch of this herb, a drop of that tincture, a muttered word scrawled on parchment, wrapped carefully so it feels like more than it is. You hand it over, watch their eyes light with fragile hope, and swallow your own doubt. Because maybe, just maybe, the illusion of love is enough. Maybe hope is the only magic you've ever really had to sell. Divination, in the mind of the villagers who come knocking at your door, is supposed to look like the tales, a crystal ball glowing with inner light, a wizard gazing deep into it, eyes rolled back, speaking in riddles as visions of the future swirl in glass. That's what they picture. What they actually get is you, crouched over a battered wooden table, staring into a chipped bowl filled with water that hasn't been changed in 3 days. The surface trembles in the flicker of candlelight, distorting shadows into shapes you pretend are meaningful. You lean in close, whisper a few guttural phrases, and let your imagination do the rest. A noble pays you coin to see the fate of his estate. A farmer offers onions to learn whether his son will return from war. And all you can do is squint at the ripples and hope the words you invent sound mysterious enough to pass for wisdom. Water scrying is the simplest method, but it's far from the only one. Sometimes you scatter animal bones on the dirt floor, waiting to see how they fall. Each angle, each cluster, becomes a story you spin into destiny. A cracked femur near the circle means trouble. A rib broken in half means a marriage. A skull fragment staring back at you means death. You speak the interpretation slowly, letting your voice carry the weight of inevitability. In truth, the bones tell you nothing. They're old scraps, sometimes stolen from kitchens, sometimes scavenged from the woods. But the clients don't know that. They see the solemnity, the smoke, the chalk circles, and they believe. Other times you burn herbs or bits of parchment, watching the smoke curl and twist into patterns. If it rises in a straight column, you declare success. If it billows thick and low, you warn of danger. If it sputters, filling the room with ash, you cough through the performance and mutter about hidden enemies. The ritual is less about truth and more about theater. You are not uncovering secrets. You are giving shape to fears already gnawing at the client's heart. They come to you because they want the future to be certain, and certainty is something you can sell, even if it doesn't exist. Sometimes you use mirrors, scraps of polished metal that catch the candlelight in warped reflections. Staring into them for long enough, you see your own face bend and shift. And if you half close your eyes, it becomes something else entirely. You mutter about spirits, about visions of angels or demons, while your stomach twists from staring too long. On darker nights, when you've been awake for hours and smoke fills your lungs, you almost believe the images yourself. You see shapes in the glass, hear whispers in the crackle of the fire. Are they tricks of the mind, or have you truly brushed against something beyond? You never know, and that uncertainty is both the terror and the allure. What no one tells you is how exhausting it is to divine the future. Every session is a performance, an improvisation built on scraps of symbols and half-remembered stories. You search your client's face for hints, for the flicker of fear or hope, and shape your prophecy accordingly. A woman clutches her shawl tighter, and you speak of loss. A man smiles too confidently, and you warn him of betrayal. The art lies not in the bones or the water, but in reading the living, in turning their own anxieties into omens. They leave convinced you saw into the fabric of time, when all you really did was mirror the worry already etched in their eyes. And yet, for all the lies, you sometimes terrify yourself. You speak of storms, and days later, black clouds roll across the fields. You warn of death, and the next week the village bell tolls for a funeral. Coincidence, you tell yourself, but the coincidence chills you. You begin to wonder if your words don't just reflect the future, but shape it, if by speaking fate aloud, you give it power. That thought gnaws at you when you try to sleep, turning every prophecy into a potential curse you've unleashed by accident. The villagers don't care about your doubts. They come back, over and over, because hope is addictive. They don't need accuracy. They need assurance. A farmer can endure another season if you promise the stars are aligned for rain. A mother can keep waiting if you tell her the bones say her son will return from war. Even when your predictions fail, they find excuses. The moon was wrong. The offering was too small. God himself interfered. Anything but admitting that the future is unknowable. They will never stop asking, because people would rather believe in lies than face the abyss of uncertainty. Of course, the church watches closely. Divination is dangerously close to heresy. Peering into the future, they say, is meddling with God's will, claiming a power that belongs to heaven alone. You protect yourself by sprinkling your rituals with psalms, by insisting the visions come from angels, not demons, but you know the suspicion never truly fades. One wrong client, one wrong interpretation, and your fortune-telling becomes the rope around your neck. You live on the edge of your own predictions, knowing the vision of fire and judgment could come true at any moment, only with you as the victim. Still, you keep the bowl of water, the bag of bones, the warped mirror. You keep the rituals alive, because without them, you are nothing. No one pays for humility. No one pays for I don't know. They pay for certainty, for the voice that declares the future with weight and conviction. And so, you keep staring into water that reflects only your weary face. Keep scattering bones that tell no more than the dirt they fall on. Keep breathing in smoke that makes your lungs ache. You lie, you improvise, you believe halfway, because they need you to, because without their belief, you vanish. Just another man with ink-stained fingers and an empty stomach. In the end, fortune-telling isn't about glimpsing what's to come. It's about surviving what's already here. The hunger, the suspicion, the desperation. And if you can trade a story for a loaf of bread, if you can spin a pattern from smoke and call it destiny, then perhaps that's its own kind of prophecy. Not of the stars, not of the gods, but of the simple truth that people will always crave certainty, and you will always be there to sell it, one trembling candle-lit vision at a time. The relationship between a wizard and the church is like a man standing on a frozen river. Every step might hold, every step might crack, and you never know which until you hear the sound beneath your feet. Some wizards spent their entire lives trying to weave themselves into the fabric of holy authority, offering their services to monasteries, copying sacred texts, lending their astronomy to calculate the date of Easter. Others were dragged screaming into the street, accused of heresy, their books burned alongside their bodies. The difference between working beside a monk and roasting at the stake was often nothing more than timing, politics, and the mood of the local priest. To the church, knowledge was meant to be filtered through Scripture. The heavens told the glory of God, yes, but only in ways approved by those who wore robes and carried crosses. When you studied the stars, you had to cloak it in piety, murmuring about divine order while quietly sketching charts that suggested fate could be predicted like the turning of a wheel. When you scribbled symbols in the margins of your manuscripts, you had to insist They were nothing but shorthand, even as the shapes bore uncanny resemblance to sigils whispered about in forbidden books. The monks let you sit in their libraries, their candles, illuminating texts older than kingdoms, but their eyes never left you. One slip, one phrase too bold, and the same hand that lent you parchment would drag you before an inquisitor. And yet, the overlap between the sacred and the forbidden was constant. The Bible itself was full of omens, dreams, and visions that could be twisted to justify your work. Was Joseph not an interpreter of dreams? Did the Magi not follow a star? If God used signs and wonders, why shouldn't you? Many wizards leaned hard on this defense, cloaking their alchemy and astrology in the language of faith. They spoke of seeking God's hidden wisdom, not stealing it. They laced their incantations with psalms, not because the words meant anything, but because they hoped the sound of Scripture would shield them from suspicion. The church tolerated them when it suited their needs. An eclipse predicted here, a healing herb suggested there, but never fully trusted them. Some wizards went further, embedding themselves fully within monastic life. They shaved their heads, donned habits, and became monks who just happened to spend more time in the apothecary or the observatory than in prayer. They copied both Bibles and grimoires, slipping between holy and unholy texts with a quill that didn't care what it inked. These men often survived, their reputations protected by the cloister walls. But even then, the line was perilous. An abbot might boast of his learned brother one year, then burn his papers the next when the bishop came visiting. Knowledge was currency, but it was never safe currency. For wizards outside the monastery, the danger was greater. Priests in villages viewed you as rivals, men who threatened their monopoly on spiritual guidance. When a farmer came to you for a cure instead of to the priest for a blessing, that was an insult. When a noble asked you to cast a horoscope instead of praying for guidance, that was theft. The priest could thunder from the pulpit that you trafficked with devils, and the congregation would nod, even as they lined up at your hut later in the week to ask for a charm against fever. Hypocrisy never protected you. The priest's words carried more weight than your herbs ever could. You learned to walk carefully, to wear a cross around your neck, to mumble prayers before lighting your candles. You told anyone who asked that your knowledge came from God, that your charts revealed the order He placed in the stars, that your herbs were part of His creation. You performed piety as carefully as you performed rituals, and yet you never believed it was enough. The stories of inquisitors traveled fast, men in black robes arriving in town, questioning everyone, searching homes for evidence of heresy. You pictured them finding your books with their cramped marginalia, your jars with their suspicious contents, your chalk circles scratched into the floor, and you imagined the fire. You didn't need to see a pyre to smell it. The thought alone was enough to make the smoke sting your lungs. Still, you couldn't stop. The church demanded faith, but you craved knowledge. Where they saw sin, you saw questions. Where they demanded obedience, you sought patterns. You knew there was danger in every page you copied, every star you charted, but ignorance was a kind of death, and curiosity had its own hunger. Some nights, you told yourself that God must want these questions asked, or else He wouldn't have hidden the answers so carefully. Other nights, you whispered that if you were damned, you might as well earn the sentence. So the relationship with the church remained a game of masks. By day, you bowed your head in mass, crossed yourself at the right moments, and murmured, "Amen," with the rest. By night, you bent over your manuscripts, your herbs, your circles, seeking what the priest could never teach. You prayed in Latin with the monks and whispered in strange syllables to the smoke in your hut. You lived in the overlap of light and shadow, never fully trusted by either world, never fully belonging to either. And in that space, between sacred and forbidden, between tolerated and condemned, you survived. For now, because every wizard knows the truth, the church can use you, the church can ignore you, But the church never forgets you. One day, when your usefulness ends or suspicion grows too loud, the frozen river will crack. And when it does, no scripture, no herb, no star will save you from drowning beneath the weight of holy fire. The wizard's workshop is less a place of wonder and more a cramped death trap. You imagine gleaming laboratories filled with orderly rows of flasks, carefully labeled jars, and scholars in spotless robes. The reality is soot-stained rafters, shelves sagging under mismatched bottles, and a floor littered with scraps of parchment and broken glass that crunch under your bare feet. The air is always thick, sometimes with the pungent reek of herbs left to rot, sometimes with the metallic tang of heated metals, sometimes with smoke so dense it clings to your throat long after you've stumbled outside coughing. Your home is a laboratory, and your laboratory is a hazard. Every spark threatens to take it all down. The fire never leaves you. A brazier glows in the corner. A pot bubbles over an open flame. Candles sputter dangerously close to curtains of drying herbs. You need them all. The fire to melt, the smoke to distill, the light to see. But every flicker is a reminder of how thin the line is between experiment and inferno. You've lost count of the number of times a careless gesture sent sparks flying onto a pile of manuscripts or the hem of your robe. Once, you spent half an hour stamping at the floor as a trail of fire crept across spilled oil, muttering prayers that the neighbors wouldn't see the smoke curling out of your roof and assume you'd summoned hell itself. Glass is the other ever-present threat. You treasure every vessel, every flask, every vial, because they cost dearly and crack easily. They are thin, fragile things, blown into strange, bulging shapes that promise precision but deliver disaster at the faintest knock. You've cut your fingers more times than you can count, bleeding into mixtures you later poured out because you couldn't remember which jar held the contamination. Sometimes the glass explodes outright, shattering into deadly shards when the liquid inside boils too fast or the heat grows uneven. More than once, you've crouched in the corner with your arms over your face, waiting for the storm of glass and smoke to settle. The scars on your hands are the true sigils of wizardry, etched not by ink but by accident. Then there are the powders. They cling to everything, coating your skin, your books, your lungs. You grind minerals into dust, herbs into fine particles, and metals into shavings that glitter like deadly snow. They hang in the air, unseen until a shaft of light reveals the haze. You breathe them in daily, each inhalation a gamble. Some powders numb your tongue, others burn your throat, others leave you dizzy and half-blind for hours. You cough black phlegm into rags, tell yourself it's just the smoke, and return to your grinding because without these powders, there is no experiment, no potion, no work at all. The accidents are constant. One day, it's a sudden eruption of flame when a mixture foams over. Another day, it's a violent crack when a sealed flask bursts from pressure, showering the room in foul-smelling liquid. You stagger through the smoke, eyes burning, skin smarting from chemical burns, telling yourself you'll be more careful next time. But you never are, because careful doesn't exist in a room where knowledge is scraped together from half-legible texts and whispered recipes. You are always guessing. You are always improvising. You are always one mistake away from disaster. Your neighbors smell it too. They wrinkle their noses when you walk through the village, your clothes saturated with sulfur, vinegar, and things they cannot name. They see the black streaks on your hands, the singe marks on your sleeves, the faint bald patches in your hair from fires you didn't stamp out fast enough. They whisper that your hut is cursed, that no holy man would live in such fumes. And maybe they're right. Sometimes, when the air grows too thick and your chest rattles with every breath, you wonder if you've been slowly poisoning yourself all along. You cough until your ribs ache, stagger to the door for air, and only once you're certain you won't collapse do you shuffle back inside to start again. There's no glamour here. The workshop is chaos, dressed as discipline. You tell yourself the clutter is organized, that you know which pile of herbs is mugwort and which is poison hemlock. But in truth, you sometimes forget, and that forgetting could kill you. You pretend the stains on the floor are from spilled ink, though you know some are from acids that ate through the boards. You pretend the smoke is just smoke, though you suspect it has changed you in ways you can't see. You look at your hands, cracked and stained, and wonder if this is what knowledge costs. And yet, for all the danger, for all the accidents that leave you burned and coughing, you can't leave it behind. The workshop is the only place where you feel close to the mystery you chase. Every shard of glass, every wisp of smoke, every explosion that rattles your teeth is proof that you are pushing at the edges of something bigger. It may kill you, but at least it gives you purpose. You sweep up the shards, you wipe the soot from your face, you open the window to clear the air, and then you light the fire again. Because tomorrow, you tell yourself, tomorrow the mixture might work. Tomorrow the smoke might reveal its secret. Tomorrow the fire might finally give instead of only taking. But deep down you know the truth. The wizard's workshop is not a temple of wisdom. It is a tinderbox. And every time you step inside, you gamble that the day's experiment won't be the one that burns it all to ash. If you are imagining the wizard as a dignified figure in robes that billow majestically, perfumed with exotic resins and incense, then take that vision and throw it straight into the dung heap. The reality is far less enchanting. Wizards stink. There is no polite way to phrase it. They smell of smoke, of scorched wool, of herbs left to rot in damp jars, and always, always of sulfur. The smell clings like a curse. It soaks into their hair, their clothing, even the very skin beneath their fingernails. Walk too close to a wizard's hut, and you will know it before you ever knock. The reek of candle wax, burning fat, and whatever unfortunate mixture last boiled over on the brazier spills out into the air like a warning. Bathing was not a daily or even weekly affair. At best, a wizard might stumble into a river in midsummer, dunk himself quickly, and call it cleanliness. More often, washing was avoided altogether. Water was treacherous. Cold water could make you sick, hot water could weaken you, and some even whispered that too much bathing left the soul vulnerable, stripped of its defenses. Better, then, to let the dirt harden into armor. Better to wear your sweat like a second skin than risk an illness that no herb in your jars could cure. And so they scratched at lice under their robes, dabbed their foreheads with rags already brown with grease, and told themselves the smell was a badge of wisdom, not neglect. The clothing made it worse. Wool robes soaked up every odor and never let go. Spill a drop of vinegar tincture on the hem, and it would follow you for months. Burn frankincense in the corner, and the smoke would weave into the fabric until your cloak carried it like a funeral shroud. Candle wax dripped down sleeves, hardened, melted again, and left a residue that smelled faintly sweet and rancid at the same time. Add in the stench of goat tallow lamps and the sharp bite of chemical experiments gone wrong, and the wizard carried a storm of smells wherever he went. Even when he tried to cover it with herbs tucked into his belt or scented oils rubbed on his wrists, the effort only layered sweetness over decay, making the result worse. Hair was another battlefield. Unwashed, matted, stiff with smoke and grease, it refused to be tamed. Beards became nests for crumbs and ash, curling into tangled ropes that clung to the chin. Fingers, forever stained with ink, ash, or powdered minerals, combed through it half-heartedly, but never improved matters. A wizard's hair was a map of his experiments. Singed patches where fire had licked too close, streaks turned strange colors by powders, an overall wildness that suggested he had been dragged backward through his own garden. Some tied it back with string, some let it hang loose, but all shared the same aura of neglect. The body itself bore the toll of such habits. Skin cracked from constant exposure to heat and smoke, darkened with soot that no scrubbing could fully erase. Nails long and ridged, sometimes blackened with substances that probably weren't healthy to touch, let alone carry around for weeks. Feet hardened from standing long hours on cold, damp floors, calloused to the point of resembling hooves, and beneath it all, the constant itch of vermin, lice, fleas, sometimes worse, that no charm or poultice seemed to keep at bay. The wizard lived in discomfort but told himself it was unimportant. Knowledge mattered more than cleanliness. Survival mattered more than comfort. Of course, the villagers noticed. They wrinkled their noses when you passed, muttering that you smelled of brimstone, which was half true and half accusation. To smell of sulfur was to smell of hellfire, and the line between experiment and damnation was thin in their eyes. Children pinched their noses as you walked by. Dogs barked, drawn to the strange bouquet of scents clinging to your robes. Neighbors whispered that the stink itself was proof of corruption, that only a man in league with devils could reek so thoroughly of things not found in the fields or kitchens of decent folk. And maybe that suited you. The smell kept them away. It preserved a boundary of fear that was sometimes more useful than respect. When you did clean yourself, it was a labor. Heating water took precious firewood, which you would rather spend on experiments. Soap was a luxury, harsh, and often made with the same lye you used for unpleasant concoctions. Scrubbing only reminded you how much filth had become part of you. The water turned black, flecked with ash, leaving you shivering and raw. And yet, no matter how hard you scrubbed, the scent of smoke clung to your hair, the sulfur lingered in your pores. Washing was never complete. It was like trying to erase years of soot from stone with a single rag. You emerged cleaner, yes, but still marked, still unmistakably a wizard. Candles and lamps did not help. You worked by their light, but they smoked constantly, dripping grease and fat, staining the walls and your body with layers of residue. Your hands carried the scent of tallow wherever you went. Your hut stank of it, a sweet and rancid perfume that no open window could fully dispel. Combined with the smell of dead rats caught in traps, herbs hung to dry until they mildewed, and animal skins you sometimes used for parchment, your home became a place few dared enter. That suited you fine. But it meant that even your own body was a reflection of the workshop. Filthy, smudged, scented with death and decay masquerading as science. Hygiene was never the priority. Knowledge was. You told yourself the dirt was a sacrifice, that cleanliness was vanity, that the saints themselves lived in filth while chasing visions of God. But deep down, you knew the truth. You were dirty because there was no time to be clean, because baths cost resources you didn't have, because water was scarce, because experiments demanded your attention more than your own skin. You accepted the grime, the grease, the smell, because it was the price of being what you were. And so the wizard walked through the world smelling of smoke and sulfur, hair wild, robes stiff with stains, skin roughened by years of neglect. He was an outcast, a curiosity, a man whose very scent marked him as something other than human. If power had a perfume, this was it: rot, fire, and candle wax. A smell so foul it kept the world at bay, even as it clung to him like a second soul. The wizard's stomach is as much a battlefield as his workshop, though far less glamorous. Hunger gnaws daily, and food is never plentiful. But when you are chasing secrets hidden in powders and tinctures, the line between meal and experiment blurs in ways both pathetic and dangerous. You tell yourself you are studying the hidden properties of plants, the alchemical correspondences between metals and humors, the mysteries of digestion itself. But in truth, you are just a man swallowing strange liquids, in the hope that one of them might unlock something beyond sickness. Bread and onions may fill your belly, but they never fill your ambition. So you grind herbs into powders, mix roots into broths, distill strange liquids over sputtering flames, and stare at the concoction as if it might whisper its secrets. Then comes the moment of decision. Who will test it? An apprentice, if you're lucky enough to have one, But apprentices grow scarce when word spreads of vomiting, rashes, or sudden death. Animals, perhaps. A dog, a goat. But villagers notice when their livestock fall sick, and they remember who bought their milk last. More often than not, the subject is you. You lift the cup to your lips, breathe in the acrid fumes, and swallow, telling yourself that greatness requires risk. A few gulps, a grimace, and then the waiting begins. Sometimes it's immediate. A burning in the throat, a twisting in the stomach, a rush of heat across the skin that leaves you gasping. You clutch your belly, stagger to a corner, and vomit until you are empty, trembling with sweat, eyes red from strain. Other times it comes hours later, creeping nausea that builds into waves of pain, sudden dizziness that makes the room spin. You lie on the floor, wondering if you've poisoned yourself beyond return, promising God that if you survive, you will be more careful. And when you do survive, you return to the brazier the next day, mixing again, swallowing again, because you cannot let the failure stop you. You learn little from these experiments, except perhaps the limits of your own body. You discover that foxglove in the wrong dose makes the heart race until you think it will burst. You discover that certain fungi bring visions but also days of cramps. You discover that too much mercury leaves a metallic taste on your tongue that lingers like guilt. Each discovery is written down carefully, scrawled into margins of books already stained with grease, as if the act of recording transforms your near death into progress. But you know the truth. Most of what you make is poison, dressed up as knowledge. And yet, there are moments that tempt you to believe. A potion meant to purge illness clears a fever overnight. An infusion of herbs eases pain, if only slightly. A strange concoction sharpens your sight for an hour, making the candlelight seem brighter. Small successes keep you chasing larger ones, even though the failures outnumber them 100-fold. Hope is stronger than nausea. You convince yourself that the next vial, the next brew, might be the one to reveal the philosopher's stone of health, wealth, or wisdom. Food itself often becomes part of the experiments. You mix powders into beer to test how they blend, stir roots into soups to see if the bitterness will fade, slip tinctures into bread dough and bake it to a crisp. Every meal is an opportunity to test a theory. A guest might be served onion broth, laced with an herb that supposedly strengthens the humors. A neighbor might leave with a loaf of bread that doubles as a trial in digestion. Sometimes the flavor disguises the danger. Sometimes it amplifies it. More than once you've sat alone at your table, chewing a crust that tastes faintly of ash and wondering if you'll still be alive by dawn. The villagers, of course, know enough to be wary. They accept your charms, your prophecies, even your cures, but they rarely eat your food. They whisper that a wizard's bread is never just bread, that a wizard's wine carries more than grapes. They watch your lips closely when you sip from a cup, waiting to see if you grimace or collapse. And when your face pales or your hands shake, they murmur that the devil has taken hold. They don't realize it is only you, once again, poisoning yourself in pursuit of knowledge that slips through your fingers like smoke. The irony is that hunger often drives you to these extremes. Real food is scarce. A loaf of bread might have to last a week, a bit of dried meat even longer. Hunger gnaws until the choice between a risky potion and an empty stomach seems smaller than it should. So you drink your experiments, hoping they will sustain as well as enlighten. Sometimes they do neither. Sometimes they send you running to the ditch outside your hut, doubled over until your throat is raw. But hunger has no patience for safety. Hunger makes fools of even the wise. And so, your life becomes a cycle of mixing, swallowing, suffering, and recording. Each burn in the throat, each spasm in the gut, each rash that spreads across your arms becomes a kind of curriculum. You are the student and the subject, the teacher and the fool. You joke to yourself that the villagers are right, that you have the devil in you. But in truth, what you have is poison, always swirling through your blood, always reminding you that the line between discovery and death is only a sip away. Still, you keep tasting, keep testing, because what else is there? You cannot afford to wait for apprentices, and you cannot trust animals to reveal the subtleties you seek. Only your own body can answer, even if the answer is agony. Each failure feels like progress, because at least you now know what not to do. Each success, however small, feels like a miracle. And miracles, even bitter ones, are what wizards live for. In the end, the wizard's table is not a place of meals but of trials. The bread, the beer, the broth are not meant to nourish but to reveal. You eat knowledge, you drink danger, and you swallow hope along with bile. Your stomach is your crucible, your body the furnace. And if one day the mixture kills you outright, well, at least you will have tested it yourself. Better a dead wizard than one who never dared to taste the truth. The wizard's workshop is never empty, even when he works alone. Something always shares the space with him. Creatures feathered, furred, or slimy, padding across the cluttered floor or clinging to shadowed corners of the rafters. To later storytellers, these animals became familiars, loyal companions bound by spells, half-demonic advisors perched on shoulders, whispering secrets of the unseen. The reality is much less grand. The animals of a wizard's hut are not emissaries of the devil. They are rats chewing at grain sacks, owls trapped in the rafters, cats wandering in for warmth, toads squatting in damp corners where rainwater pools. They stay not because of sorcery, but because food and shelter are easier to find here than out in the fields. Cats are perhaps the most common and the most misunderstood. They slink in uninvited, their eyes flashing in candlelight, their bodies brushing against jars and books stacked carelessly on the floor. They do not serve you. They demand from you, with yowls and claws, scraps of bread or broth you can scarcely spare. Yet they repay you in their own way, keeping rats and mice at bay, scattering pests before they chew through your precious parchment. You never intended to keep cats, but now they are always there, curling atop piles of manuscripts, knocking over inkpots with their tails, staring into your face as if they see something you do not. Villagers peek through your window and see their gleaming eyes reflected in the dark. To them, it looks like proof of sorcery, proof that the wizard keeps demons in feline skin. You do not correct them. Fear is useful. Owls arrive less by choice than by accident. Drawn to the warmth of the rafters and the easy prey of mice, they swoop in through open shutters and sometimes stay for weeks. Their hoots echo through the night, blending with the hiss of your fire and the creak of your floorboards until you feel as if the walls themselves are speaking. When an owl fixes its gaze on you, unblinking, head cocked unnaturally, it is easy to see why people believe it, a creature of omens. Their presence unsettles even you. Sometimes they leave feathers behind, scattered across the floor like fragments of prophecy. You tuck them into books, grind them into powders, or simply let them gather in corners with the dust. The villagers glimpse an owl perching on your roof and whisper that it is your spirit guide. You know better. It is just hungry. The toads are worse. They lurk in dampness, squatting near the water jars, croaking at night until you curse them under your breath. They do not serve you. They do not protect you. They simply exist, fat and warty, slipping underfoot at the worst moments. But their presence becomes useful. You scoop them up and drop them into jars, pin their legs to dissect them, grind their dried bodies into powders you swear have medicinal or magical effect. Do they work? Rarely. Do people believe they might? Often. A peasant who sees you pocket a squirming toad is convinced you are brewing something unnatural. When they later hear the croak of frogs in the marshes, they whisper that you command them. In truth, you are more likely to trip over one than to command it. Rats are the constant enemies and companions both. No matter how many cats stalk your hut, the rats always return, chewing at sacks of grain, leaving droppings on your manuscripts, scurrying across shelves in the middle of rituals. You trap them, you poison them, you sometimes experiment on them. You feed them strange powders, watch their bodies convulse, then scribble down your observations with grim detachment. They are test subjects when nothing else is available, expendable bodies to prove whether a tincture kills or cures. Their squeaks fill the night as you work, a chorus of scavengers who thrive in the chaos you create. Later legends will call them servants of your will. In reality, they serve themselves, and you merely make use of their endless numbers. Dogs, too, wander into wizard huts, though rarely. They follow the smell of food, of bones discarded after experiments, and they linger long enough to gnaw on scraps. Sometimes they become companions of a sort, sitting by the fire, watching you with trusting eyes that no human ever turns your way. You feel a twinge of guilt when you tie a charm to their collar, testing whether it protects them from illness. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The villagers see a dog trotting after you and assume it has been enchanted. They do not understand that it is loyalty, not sorcery, that binds the animal. Over time, your workshop becomes a menagerie of the uninvited. Cats sprawled across parchment, owls watching from beams, toads croaking under jars, rats gnawing at corners, insects buzzing in clouds around spilled honey or vinegar. You do not banish them. In their own way, they belong to the life you have chosen. They feed on your waste, you feed on their presence, and between the two of you, an uneasy coexistence forms. But the villagers, with their simple minds and their fear of what they do not understand, see more in it. They see a wizard surrounded by unnatural allies, a man whose very footsteps summon beasts to his side. You let them believe it. You let them think the cat's yawn is a devil's grin, that the owl's gaze is prophecy, that the toad's croak is a spell half finished. You encourage the whispers because they make you powerful. If the villagers fear the animals, they will fear you, and fear is as valuable as coin. And yet, when you lie awake at night, the truth presses harder. You are not a master of animals, but their intruder. You live in their world, and they have claimed your hut as much as you have. Later, stories will paint you with a sleek black cat on your shoulder, an owl circling above, a toad croaking in your hand as you whisper incantations. The truth is far less glorious. The cat is covered in fleas, the owl steals your mice, the toad stinks of marsh water, and the rat gnaws through your best manuscript while you sleep. But still, you do not chase them away. Because in your loneliness, even pests are company, and in your hunger for knowledge, even vermin become teachers. Night is when the wizard feels both most alive and most afraid. By day, the world presses in with its noise, its demands, its suspicious stares. But when the sun sets and the village shutters its windows, the wizard's workshop becomes his domain. The only light is the flicker of tallow candles, the glow of embers in the brazier, and the pale wash of the moon through warped glass. It is in this dim silence that he scratches ink across parchment, charts the slow crawl of constellations, and mutters lines from books so smudged they may as well be ghosts whispering through paper. Sleep is a luxury he rarely allows himself. Knowledge waits at night, and he fears that if he rests, it will slip away into the darkness with the stars. But exhaustion is its own demon. His eyes sting, his hands shake, his head lolls forward until ink blots stain the margins of his work. He jerks awake with a start, certain he has heard footsteps outside, only to realize it was the pop of the fire. His body begs for rest, but his mind refuses, circling endlessly around unfinished charts and untested mixtures. To close his eyes feels like surrender, like leaving his fragile fortress unguarded. There are too many threats in the night. If not demons clawing at the edge of his circle, then the more earthly danger of villagers gathering with torches. In the silence of the hours after midnight, every sound becomes a warning. A creak in the rafters is a spirit. A distant dog bark is a mob forming. Sleep is dangerous because it means lowering your guard. When he does collapse into slumber, it is never peaceful. He dreams in fragments, vivid and terrible, flames licking at his feet, shadows stretching across the floor, whispering in voices that are his own but twisted, faces of villagers staring, blank-eyed, chanting his name as they drag him to a stake. Sometimes he sees demons, grotesque shapes with wings like torn cloth and teeth that drip with smoke. Sometimes he sees angels, but they are no less frightening, burning figures that blind his eyes and leave him trembling when he wakes. Dreams are not refuge. They are reminders that his fears follow him even into sleep, and the body suffers from this restless cycle. His skin grows pallid, his eyes ringed with bruised circles, his thoughts scattered by fatigue. He nods off in the middle of copying a text, waking hours later to find ink spilled across the page and the candle burned down to a stub. He stumbles outside at dawn, blinking against the light, and the villagers mutter that he looks half dead, which in their minds is proof he communes with things unholy. They do not see the endless nights, the cramped fingers, the terror that has become routine. They see only a man marked by shadows, and they are not entirely wrong. The stars themselves are both solace and torment. He climbs to rooftops or hillsides, staring upward until his neck aches, tracing patterns in the sky that promise order. For a moment, the sight of constellations wheeling above gives him a sense of place, a reminder that the universe is vast and he is but a speck. But then the fear returns. What if he reads the stars wrong? What if he overlooks an omen? What if the heavens are not a book to be read but a trap designed to lure him into folly? He writes furiously, scribbling notes in cramped Latin, lines overlapping, diagrams sketched until his parchment looks less like astronomy and more like madness. He tells himself this work justifies his sleeplessness, but deep down, he knows it is also the excuse for it. And so, when dawn comes, it does not feel like relief. The light creeps in to find him slumped at his desk, candles guttered, face waxy with sweat, eyes bloodshot and haunted. He rubs his temples, mutters that he will rest soon, and reaches for another quill. Rest never comes. Instead, paranoia grows. He thinks of how vulnerable he must look when unconscious, sprawled in straw, mouth open, hands slack. He thinks of spirits slipping through cracks, of villagers creeping to his door, of flames consuming him before he even wakes. He imagines never opening his eyes again. He imagines opening them only to see the leering face of a demon or the sneer of an inquisitor. Fear sharpens into habit. Habit sharpens into ritual. He convinces himself he does not need sleep, not like other men. He tells himself wizards thrive in darkness, and in the saying of it, he half believes. But his body betrays him. He sleeps in snatches, minutes stolen when his head droops, hours lost when fatigue drags him under against his will. And in those moments, the nightmares return, sharper each time, as if the demons he fails to summon in his rituals find their way into his dreams instead. He wakes with a scream, sweat soaking his straw, breath tearing in and out of his chest. He scrambles for the nearest candle, lights it with trembling hands, and surrounds himself with the comfort of flame. The shadows retreat, but only just. The silence presses heavier than before. He tells himself it was only a dream, but the pounding of his heart says otherwise. This cycle repeats endlessly, night after night. Sleeplessness, study, paranoia, collapse, nightmare, panic, and then back again. He knows it is wearing him thin, but he cannot stop. Wizards are expected to suffer, to pay for knowledge with their bodies and their minds. He sees his gaunt reflection in a bowl of water and tells himself it is the price of wisdom. He sees the dark hollows of his eyes and whispers that the world has always looked away from those who bear truth. But when his head hits the straw and he jolts awake in terror, He knows it is not wisdom he has bought. It is only fear, paid and hours stolen from sleep. And still, he keeps the candles lit, keeps the quill scratching, keeps his eyes fixed on stars he barely understands. Because if he sleeps, the terrors come. And if he doesn't, perhaps the knowledge will finally reveal itself in the darkness before dawn. The wizard is never sure which fate is worse. You wake to smoke because gold exists, not because you have any, but because it has you. Its idea lodged like a splinter under the fingernail of your mind. People call it greed, and sometimes it is, but mostly it's survival with a halo. A handful of bright metal means rent paid to a lord who doesn't know your name, tithes warded off for a season, a winter's worth of candles and grain. In a world where coin vanishes into taxes and bribes and shoes with holes, gold becomes not a luxury but a shield. So you chase it from dawn to soot-streaked dusk, breath salted with mercury, hands burned raw, telling yourself this is not folly, this is hope in a crucible. The obsession has rules, old ones with the weight of scripture. Gold is the incorruptible metal, immune to rust, a kind of mineral saint. If base metals decay because they're unfinished, then surely, so the books insist, they can be completed. Lead is a sleeping sun, copper a tarnished dawn. Push them through the right trials, the right marriages of fire and vapors, and they will wake perfected. It is theology performed with tongs. Transmutation is not just wealth but proof that the world can be remade, that behind rot and famine and failed harvests, there is a hidden grammar of improvement. The philosopher's stone promises not only gold but medicine, panaceas, restoratives, a draft that turns the frail body into something that resists time. If you could coax one miracle from ash, perhaps the rest would follow. The texts do not help so much as haunt. They speak in foxes and lions, in eagles and kings, in marriages that are not marriages, and deaths that are not deaths. Marry the red to the white, one line insists, and you grind cinnabar into quicksilver until your teeth ache from the metallic taste that rises in your throat. Kill the green dragon, another declares, and you watch vitriol hiss against a coin, smoke curling like a threat. They never say plainly what to do. They promise and evade in the same ink stroke, as if wisdom were a door that opens only when you stop trying to touch it. You swear you can almost hear them laugh when a vessel cracks, and your experiment slumps into useless gray slag. Work, then, fills the silence the books refuse to break. Bellows wheeze, and the furnace mouth glows like a small, fickle sun. You nurse it with charcoal, coax it with breath, feed it with filings scraped from coins you could have spent. The room stings with saltpeter and sulfur, with vinegar and smoke, with that slippery, mirror-bright river of mercury that glides and breaks and glides again. You jacket a crucible in clay and pray it holds. You watch the metal darken, then brighten, then scab over, and every change feels like an answer you cannot translate. The patience this work demands makes prayer look hurried. Sometimes a patron appears, followed by the smell of roast meat and new leather, by rings that flash in candlelight when he taps the table in impatience. He has heard that you can help a kingdom's treasury breathe easier, that you can conjure coins from scraps, that you can spin debt into dawn. He offers a purse now and a cell later if you fail. You agree because there is no choice. He installs you in a warmer room with better bellows, and for a few months you eat meat twice a week and forget your leaking roof. Then the metal stubbornly refuses its resurrection, the purse thins, and the suspicion thickens. Wealthy men do not understand the difference between slow and impossible. Dungeons do. There is the temptation. And some days, it is more hunger than temptation to cheat. A pinch of gold leaf palmed at the right moment, a crucible with a false bottom, ready to disgorge a sliver of brightness, a set of tongs with a secret. You tell yourself it is a demonstration, not a fraud, that if you had more time the truth would follow the trick. But fakery purchases only a reprieve, and coins gained that way stain the hand in a way soot never does. When discovery comes, it is swifter than flame. A door kicked in, a blow that leaves a ringing in the ear, an hour of explanations met with a gesture to the irons. Most days, there is no patron, no dungeon, only debt. You pawn a book to buy salt. You sell a flask to buy coal. You break a second flask and stare at it like a bad omen. You live on old bread and onion and the thinnest beer, writing figures in the margins of a grimoire, as if arithmetic were a charm. A neighbor knocks to ask if you can spare a coin, and you close the door quickly so she won't see you counting candle stubs. When a tiny gleam appears in a button of cooled metal, when a wash of yellow edges out of the gray, you feel your ribs loosen with relief. Then you scrape it and realize it's only wish reflected back at you, and still, the work matters in ways that gold does not. The failures teach you lessons no prince prizes, how vapors can be split and caught, how spirits of sharp taste can bite through metal, how oils will separate, how pigments can be made brighter than blood and more lasting than sky. You learn to summon a clear spirit from wine that burns sweet and invisible, to pull a yellow smoke from ore that will etch in secret, to coax a red from sulfur and mercury that painters will call vermilion. None of it pays for wood today. All of it will build laboratories in centuries you will never see. Your notes, smudged and cramped, end up beneath some monk's steady script, the crude ancestors of recipes that will one day wear the name chemistry, like a crown. You will not collect the taxes on your own discoveries. The worst of it is not poverty, but nearness. You wake at night certain that if you had lifted the crucible 10 heartbeats earlier, if you had ground the salt 1 minute longer, if the charcoal had burned 1 shade hotter, you would have seen it. The skin of metal blushing, then blooming into that impossible buttery color that never tarnishes. Nearness is a noise in the skull. You chase it through winters that leave your fingers cracked, and summers that leave your lungs tasting like coins. Your friends. If the word can be stretched to fit men who give each other tips and take each other's patrons, die one by one, their teeth loosening, their hands trembling, their notes stained with blood and wine, it never occurs to any of you to stop, because gold is only the headline. The story beneath is your hatred of decay, your refusal to accept that everything rots: houses, bodies, reputations, love. Transmutation promises a counter-argument. If lead can become gold, then maybe a man can become more than the sum of his coughing. Maybe a life can be finished instead of spent. You tell yourself that even if the coin never comes, the proof will, that the world hides a ladder and you have found the first rung in ash. In the end, your ladder reaches a shelf where a few pawn tickets live, a ledger with more ink than numbers, and a table scarred by hot metal and cold knives. Your clothes are stiff with burns, your lungs rattle, your hands smell forever of smoke and sour wine. You hide 1 bright chip in a paper twist and set it beside your bed, not because it is valuable. It isn't. But because it catches candlelight the way you always imagined the future would. The stone never arrives. The gold never blooms. Your last inventory is of scars. Most wizards die broke. The wizard's greatest enemy is not the mob at the door or the priest at the pulpit. It is what waits on the shelves inside his own hut. Jars of powders that glitter too brightly, bottles of liquids that smoke when uncorked, lumps of ore with a beauty so sharp it cuts in more ways than one. He handles them with bare fingers because he has nothing else, no gloves, no glass shield, no mask, but the sleeve he pulls across his face. He tells himself caution is enough, but caution is a thin defense against substances that do not forgive. Each pinch of powder, each drop of liquid, is a coin tossed into a well whose bottom is his body. Mercury is the most mesmerizing. A drop spilled onto the table beads up and rolls like a living thing, gliding away when he tries to catch it, breaking apart into silver pearls that shine in candlelight. He scoops them back together with his hand, grinning at the miracle of metal that flows like water. He heats it, distills it, swirls it into mixtures that promise transformation. And while he does, his breath carries in invisible fumes that slip into his lungs, into his blood, into the marrow of his bones. He coughs and calls it smoke. His hands tremble, and he blames fatigue. But mercury leaves its signature in the way his teeth loosen, the way his memory slips, the way his body begins to betray him in small humiliations. The villagers whisper of possession. The truth is simpler. He is poisoning himself. Slowly, beautifully, inevitably. Lead is duller, heavier, but no less dangerous. He melts it often, pouring the thick liquid into molds, mixing filings into experiments that promise to make it gold. The fumes rise unseen, acrid only when too concentrated to ignore. He breathes them in night after night, the taste of metal crawling down his throat. His fingers grow stiff, his belly aches, his mind fogs over with a heaviness that no candle can burn away. Children chew on leaden amulets he's made, believing they ward off sickness, and he watches them grow pale and weak without ever connecting the charm to the curse. Lead is slow, patient, cruel. It waits inside the body until there is nothing left but fatigue. Arsenic is more brazen. Powdered, it is deceptively white, like sugar or flour, easy to mistake, impossible to forget. A pinch can kill. He keeps it in jars marked with scribbles only he can read. Yet still he finds himself coughing when the dust rises, his throat raw, his eyes watering. He mixes it into experiments with trembling hands, always fearing the smallest spill. Sometimes he uses it deliberately, grinding it into a medicine meant to purge a sickness, a cure harsher than the disease. When the patient dies, he tells himself it was fate, not the powder he scattered. But deep down, the guilt sticks. He knows arsenic kills. He also knows he cannot stop using it. Knowledge demands risk, and arsenic is a shortcut too tempting to ignore. The collection grows. Sulfur that burns his lungs when it sputters over the flame. Antimony that brings vomiting when he tests it on himself. Copper salts that leave green stains on his skin and bitterness on his tongue. He hoards them all like a miser, convinced each substance holds a secret. He cannot afford to fear them. Fear would mean discarding half his workshop. Instead, he pretends he is immune. He convinces himself his body is stronger than others, that the poisons bow to him, that their effects are the price of wisdom rather than signs of decay. But the toll is obvious. His hair thins, his gums rot, his nails turn strange colors, his skin cracks in patches that no ointment soothes, his eyes water constantly, clouding with a haze that makes his careful notes blur. His hands shake so badly some days he can barely hold a quill, yet still he forces himself to copy recipes, spilling ink that runs across the page like his own body breaking down. He tells himself these are the marks of age, of exhaustion, of sacrifice. They are the marks of poison. And yet, the villagers believe the opposite. They see his sallow skin, his red eyes, his twitching hands, and they whisper that he has been touched by unholy power, that the devil has left his fingerprints. They think his tremors are the weight of visions, his sores the marks of forbidden pacts. They do not realize the truth is far less dramatic and far more tragic. The wizard is not chosen by demons. He is eroded by his own jars. There are nights he knows it. Nights when the coughing will not stop, when his hands cramp into claws, when his heart hammers against his ribs as if trying to escape. He lies in the dark, staring at the rafters, and admits to himself that the very substances he hoped would grant immortality are killing him piece by piece. But dawn comes, and with it, the hunger for discovery returns. He lights the brazier, opens another jar, and convinces himself that today might be the day the poison turns to cure, the base metal turns to gold, the sickness turns to life. And so he continues, day after day, surrounded by dangerous substances that glimmer like promises and cut like knives. Every experiment leaves him weaker. Every breath draws in another dose. Every success is drowned by the failures written in his trembling body. The irony is sharp enough to taste. The wizard's pursuit of knowledge, of life extended, of matter perfected, ends not with revelation but with poisoning. His body becomes the experiment, his bones the crucible, his blood the test. It is not demons that claim most wizards. It is their own shelves. Kings do not hire wizards out of trust. They hire them out of desperation. A monarch with a failing harvest, an empty treasury, or a restless court will grasp at any tool that promises certainty. And so a wizard is summoned, ushered through gilded halls that smell of wine and sweat, into chambers where whispers carry more weight than swords. You are not treated as an equal, nor even as a servant. You are an instrument, a curiosity, a last resort in human form. They want you to see what their generals cannot, to promise what their priests dare not, to make sense of a future that terrifies them. You are expected to deliver prophecy, not probability. The stars must speak clearly. The bones must fall with precision. If you hesitate, if you say the heavens are clouded, the king's smile hardens. He did not summon you for vagueness. He summoned you for certainty. You stand before men who command armies, men who can end your life with a gesture, and you must tell them how long their reign will last, whether war will be won, whether marriage will bear heirs. You cannot refuse. So you speak with as much authority as your quill can muster, your voice steady even as your hands sweat beneath your robe. And in the moment, the performance feels almost real. Courtiers lean in, their jeweled fingers gripping the edges of tables, their eyes wide as you trace lines across a chart or scatter bones onto velvet. Their breath catches when you mutter about Mars burning bright, when you speak of Saturn's shadow crossing the moon. They do not understand the symbols, and that ignorance is your armor. You could tell them anything, and they would hear truth. Yet you know too well that truth is not what matters, only outcome. If the war is lost, if the marriage proves barren, if the harvest rots in the fields, your prophecy curdles into treason. You cannot be wrong in the eyes of a king. And so, politics becomes a labyrinth. You must say enough to satisfy, but not enough to trap yourself. You must hedge every bold promise with a warning that fate is fickle, that God's will may shift, that men's actions can undo what the stars foretell. You must flatter without groveling, caution without cowardice, inspire without committing. Too vague, and they dismiss you as a fraud. Too exact, and you hand them a noose to hang you with later. Every sentence you speak in a royal chamber is sharpened like a blade, and the edge always points toward your throat. The courtiers, too, are enemies disguised as allies. They smile as you read their horoscopes, as you mutter about the influence of Venus or Jupiter. But behind the smiles is calculation. They wait for you to slip, to contradict yourself, to predict their ruin where they hoped for glory. Some slip coins into your hand to speak favorably of them before the king, a bribe wrapped in velvet words. Others whisper threats, warning you to keep their enemies under ill omens. You are caught in their feuds, unwillingly drafted into games that can topple kingdoms. One wrong word at the wrong feast, and your body might be found floating in the moat before dawn. The kings themselves are no less dangerous. One ruler summons you to bless his newborn son, and you murmur of strength and longevity, though you see in the child's weak breath a shadow of death. Another demands to know the outcome of a campaign, and you swear the stars favor his army, though you know his soldiers march hungry into winter. To speak honestly would be suicide. To lie is survival, at least for now. And yet, when the child dies or the army breaks, your name is dragged across the court like a carcass. Some kings forget their own folly and blame the wizard alone. Others decide they have no further use for men who remind them of failure. Either way, you are left standing on the edge of a blade sharpened by power. There are moments of triumph, brief as they are, when a prediction seems to come true, when the harvest blooms after you spoke of fortune, when a prince wins a battle you said would be blessed. The court looks at you with awe instead of suspicion. They call you learned, wise, touched by divine knowledge. You are showered with gifts, seated closer to the throne, fed at tables where meat is fresh and bread is white. For a fleeting season, you feel like a man who has cheated the order of the world, but such triumphs do not last. Favor is fragile, and memory in royal halls is short. One failed sign, one faltering omen, and yesterday's prophet is today's fraud. Worse still, the church watches these alliances with sharp eyes. A wizard who grows too close to power becomes a threat not only to nobles, but to priests. Your presence in the royal chamber is tolerated only so long as you do not outshine the authority of the pulpit. If the king begins to trust your words more than prayers, whispers of heresy bloom. You are accused of meddling in divine mysteries, of twisting God's creation to your own ends. And the same king who once relied on you nods solemnly as bishops condemn you, washing his hands of the wizard who once promised him victory. You become a scapegoat for failures, a convenient body to burn so that the crown remains untarnished. And yet, wizards keep walking into palaces when summoned. They know the risks, they know the dangers, but the lure of proximity to power is as strong as the lure of gold. To speak in a room where decisions carve the fate of nations is intoxicating. To have the ear of a king, even briefly, is to stand closer to the sun than most men ever will. And so, they gamble their lives, speaking of stars and omens, balancing fear against ambition with every breath. Most leave court poorer than they entered, some in chains, some in coffins. The lucky ones slip away before the tide turns, retreating back to smoky huts and cluttered shelves. But the memory of those rooms, the velvet and gold, the moment when a king leaned forward to listen to their words, stays with them until the end. Wizards and politics make poor bedfellows. Yet time and again the wizard answers the summons, because for a moment he is not the outcast, not the charlatan, not the feared hermit. For a moment he is the voice of destiny itself, and that moment is worth the risk of losing his head. To call a wizard a fraud is easy. Villagers muttered it, priests thundered it, rivals whispered it into ears that already wanted to believe. And many times it was true. Quicksilver promised to cure coughs, but only poisoned the lungs. Elixirs claimed to banish death, but brought fevers instead. Amulets against plague turned black in the hand, long before they stopped disease. But buried under the layers of folly and spectacle was something harder to dismiss. Accidents that revealed truths, small sparks of reason glowing beneath the smoke of superstition. Wizards did not mean to invent science, but their endless fumbling laid the crooked path to it. The alchemist, stirring a crucible of lead and sulfur, believed he was coaxing it into gold. He was wrong. But in watching how metals melted and reformed, how heat transformed powders into vapors and vapors back into crystals, he was recording the first crude lessons of chemistry. He wrote down recipes that were failures in one sense, but maps in another, showing how saltpeter could be purified, how acids could be distilled, how minerals could be separated and recombined. He did not call it science, he called it mystery. Yet centuries later, a man in a clean laboratory would read his notes and recognize the skeleton of a method hiding under the ash. The astrologer tracing constellations believed Mars governed war and Venus governed love. He was wrong too. But in charting the sky night after night, marking the movements of stars and planets with painstaking accuracy, he built a record more useful than his prophecies. He became a proto-astronomer without knowing it. The tables he compiled, meant to predict fate, instead revealed orbits. His diagrams, scribbled on parchment and tucked beside horoscopes, became tools for sailors crossing oceans and scholars plotting eclipses. He thought he was reading the mind of God. What he really built was data, and data endures long after prophecy fades. The wizard grinding herbs in a mortar believed he was brewing charms. He hung them in doorways, sprinkled them on beds, pressed them into the hands of the sick. Most were useless, some were harmful. But sometimes they worked. Willow bark dulled pain, garlic fought infection, foxglove steadied a faltering heart. He did not know why, only that they seemed to help more often than chance. The villagers called him a healer or a quack, depending on the day. But later, men with sharper tools would test the same plants and give them new names: salicin, allicin, digitalis. Medicine grew out of his fumbling guesses, born from a garden half poison and half cure. Even their mistakes taught lessons. A wizard who nearly choked on mercury fumes learned the danger of vapors, writing notes in the margin about the need for open windows. Another who observed that copper vessels turned sour wine blue began to suspect that materials could leach unseen into liquids. They lacked theory, lacked safety, lacked a framework to connect these fragments. But they noticed, they recorded, they wondered. Curiosity survived in their soot-stained notebooks long after their bodies had rotted from the very poisons they studied. The world did not yet have the word scientist. It had men called magus, sorcerer, alchemist. They wore no clean coats, used no sterile instruments, followed no agreed rules of method. But they shared the same hunger, to understand what lay beneath appearances, to coax hidden truths out of stubborn matter. They groped in the dark, guided more by metaphor than by reason, but sometimes their hands brushed against reality. When they blew powders into flame and saw colors bloom, they did not know they were glimpsing elements. When they boiled urine and saltpeter together in flasks, they did not know they were stumbling toward phosphorus. When they tracked the waxing and waning of the moon, they did not know they were charting mechanics that would one day send machines into the sky. To their neighbors, they were dangerous fools. To priests, they were heretics. To themselves, they were seekers of wisdom. And to the future, they were unwitting architects. The laboratory of the wizard, messy, smoky, filled with jars and rats and fire, was the ancestor of the clean, ordered halls where modern science was born. Every superstition, every false hope, every failure carried within it a shard of progress. They died, broke, sick, accused, mocked, but their notes lingered, their methods sharpened, their accidents preserved. It is tempting to draw a straight line from wizard to scientist, as though Newton stepped neatly out of the ashes of an alchemist's furnace. The truth is messier. Much was wasted, much was delusion. But without those fumbling hands in smoky huts, there would be no shoulders for Newton to stand on. The wizard did not become the scientist. The wizard prepared the ground where science could grow. And so the story of wizardry is not only one of fraud and fear, it is also the story of seeds sown in poisoned soil, of knowledge mistaken for magic, of failure that still managed to teach. When a wizard mixed lead with mercury and prayed for gold, he gave us chemistry. When he read the stars for kings and peasants alike, he gave us astronomy. When he tested herbs on himself and his neighbors, he gave us medicine. He thought he was calling upon hidden forces. He was, in truth, beginning to uncover natural laws. The irony is sharp. The men called quacks, sorcerers, heretics were sometimes the closest thing their age had to scientists. They stumbled, they bled, they coughed themselves to death on fumes. But in the wreckage of their failures, the future found its foundation. They were wrong in almost everything. And because they were wrong, someone else could finally be right. Evening comes slowly for the wizard, though not gently. The air grows colder, the shadows longer, and the smoke from his brazier hangs heavy in the rafters, refusing to leave even when the shutters are cracked open. His body aches from standing, his fingers are stained with ink and soot, and his eyes blur from hours spent squinting at texts written in crabbed Latin. The villagers outside are already asleep, their houses dark, their doors barred against the night. But the wizard lingers over his work, unwilling to trust that tomorrow will grant him another chance to continue. Knowledge is a fickle guest. It slips away if left unattended, vanishes if not pressed into parchment or glass before the body gives out. Closing the day's labor is itself a ritual. He lifts each manuscript carefully, blowing ash from the edges, pressing them together into uneven stacks. Some are valuable, copied from older works borrowed from monasteries or purchased at impossible cost. Others are his own, messy with errors, filled with frantic scribbles that no one else could understand. He ties them in bundles with bits of twine, then tucks them beneath boards in the floor or hides them under jars, fearful of both fire and discovery. A single candle overturned could erase years of labor. A single priest's glance could turn those same pages into evidence of heresy. He knows well that words are more dangerous than flames. The candles themselves must be extinguished with care. Wax has pooled onto the table, dripping and hardening into ridges that look like melted bones. He cups his hand above each flame, snuffing them one by one until the room shrinks back into the dim red glow of the brazier. He does not dare leave them burning through the night. Fire has no mercy, and the thatched roof above him is as dry as tinder. He has seen huts burn to nothing in minutes, leaving nothing but blackened timbers and the stink of loss. If his home went up in smoke, the villagers would not grieve. They would call it divine punishment. They would say the devil's work had been cleansed. And so he moves through the darkened space, arranging jars back on shelves, covering crucibles, sweeping powders into corners with the edge of his sleeve. It is less about order than about appeasement. He cannot sleep while the tools of his trade look restless. The hum of glass, the whisper of herbs, the faint gleam of metals in their bowls, they all seem to watch him, waiting. Tidying is the only way to silence them, to convince himself that the workshop will not rise up against him in his absence. It is not cleanliness, but control, however fleeting. When the room is finally quiet, the wizard kneels, not before an altar but beside his own bed of straw. He murmurs prayers half remembered from childhood, words that sound hollow in his mouth yet necessary all the same. He prays not for salvation, nor even for success, but for safety. That no villager will wake in the night and decide he has caused their child's fever. That no priest will ride into town before dawn with accusations ready. That no rival will whisper his name into the wrong ear. His life balances on suspicion, and suspicion needs no evidence. He has seen neighbors dragged away for less. To be accused is to be condemned, and so he prays only for one more sunrise free of shackles. Sometimes, in these moments of weariness, he feels the weight of the masks he has worn all day. To patrons, he is confident, learned, a man who speaks in certainty. To peasants, he is half a healer, half a menace. To priests, he is penitent, humble, eager to frame his work as a pursuit of God's order. But alone, kneeling in the shadows, he knows himself for what he is, tired, afraid, and never sure if he has crossed the invisible line that separates study from sin. The church never defines that line clearly. It shifts with politics, with moods, with convenience. A man praised for knowledge today may burn for it tomorrow. That is what haunts him most. Not that he might be wrong, but that he might be right at the wrong time. The hut creaks as night deepens. The straw rustles with rats or spirits. It is hard to tell the difference when one lives so close to both. He pulls a rough blanket over his shoulders, trying to ignore the cold, the itch of lice, the faint metallic taste that never leaves his mouth after years of fumes. Sleep does not come easily. He tosses, listens to his own breath, counts the beats of his heart, as though each one is proof he has survived the day. Even when his eyes close, he does not rest. He drifts into half dreams of flames, of villagers with torches, of books ripped from his hands and thrown into pyres. His worst visions are not demons but men, neighbors, priests, nobles, faces twisted with the satisfaction of destroying what they do not understand. And yet, when dawn inevitably returns, he will rise again, stretch his sore limbs, and light new candles. The cycle repeats because it must. He cannot stop chasing the fragments of truth buried in smoke and ash. He cannot stop scratching symbols onto parchment or mixing powders into vessels. His work is both curse and purpose, and without it, he would be nothing but another peasant bowed under the weight of fields and taxes. The danger is constant, but the danger is the only thing that makes him feel alive. So every evening ends with the same fragile ritual. Books hidden, candles extinguished, prayers whispered. Not prayers for heaven, not prayers for miracles, but prayers that tomorrow still belongs to him. That when the sun rises, his workshop will still stand, his body will still breathe, and his secrets will still be safe. It is a small request, but in the life of a wizard, it is the only one that matters. The end of a wizard's life rarely arrives quietly. There is no dignified passing in a warm bed, no circle of apprentices mourning their master's wisdom. More often it comes with a cough that does not stop, a flame that leaps too high, or a rope pulled taut in the town square. Wizards spend their days courting danger, and when death comes, it is only the natural conclusion of the risks they have long embraced. Illness stalks them first, the invisible result of years inhaling smoke and fumes, handling powders with bare hands, swallowing concoctions that corroded the body from within. A wizard might wake one morning with his vision blurred, his hands trembling, his breath ragged, and still convince himself that another elixir, another purge, another trial will restore him. But the poisons have already claimed him, seeping into bone and blood until the body collapses under the weight of its own decay. For some, the end is swifter, but no less cruel. An experiment flares beyond control, glass shattering into shards that pierce the skin, flames roaring until the room becomes an inferno. Neighbors rush to see the smoke, not to help but to point, whispering that the devil has come to collect what is his. A charred body among the ruins is not seen as tragedy but as confirmation. They shake their heads and say they always suspected such an end. The wizard becomes proof for their sermons. Meddle too long with fire and brimstone, and the earth will open to swallow you whole. Others are undone not by fire or illness but by men. Suspicion festers into accusation, accusation hardens into trial, and trial almost always ends in death. The evidence is rarely more than whispers, a few strange jars, a book written in a language no one can read, but it does not matter. Fear requires no proof. The wizard is paraded through streets, jeered at by the same villagers who once begged for cures and charms. A rope is tied, or a pyre built, and the crowd gathers not out of justice but out of hunger for spectacle. The wizard burns or hangs, not as an individual but as a warning. His ashes scatter, and his name lives on only as a tale told to frightened children. Irony hangs heavy in these deaths. The men who sought to cure sickness often died sick. The men who sought to transmute metals were reduced to dust themselves. The men who tried to predict the future never foresaw their own end. Their lives were consumed by the chase for knowledge, yet they are remembered only for failure, cautionary figures wrapped in smoke and rumor. Where they hoped for immortality, they found only oblivion. Where they sought reverence, they earned fear, and yet their deaths do not erase their work. Notes survive, passed hand to hand, hidden in monasteries, tucked into libraries that do not understand their worth. A young scholar opens a battered manuscript, finds recipes scrawled in the margins, and sees not heresy, but possibility. A physician reads of a plant once used by a wizard and tests it anew, discovering in it a medicine that endures. Even the failures teach lessons to those who follow. The wizard's death may be public, humiliating, violent, but in the quiet pages left behind, there lingers a spark of what he tried to grasp. To the villagers, though, he is simply gone. They remember the smell of sulfur, the strange mutterings at night, the shadows that stretched oddly across his hut. They tell each other that God's justice has prevailed, that the world is safer now without him. Children throw stones at the ruins of his workshop, scattering what remains of jars and broken crucibles. For them, the wizard is not a man but a story, a living lesson turned into ash, and stories last longer than bodies. In the end, that is the wizard's legacy. Not riches, not power, not the triumph of discovery, but a reputation shaped by fear and failure. He dies sick, burned, or condemned, and the world moves on as if he never existed, except as a name spoken in warning. The irony is unbearable, but also fitting. Wizards devoted their lives to chasing what could not be caught. When death arrived, it claimed them as it claims everyone else, and still they are remembered not for what they learned, but for how they died. Most wizards did not escape their fate. They did not find the philosopher's stone. They did not unlock immortality. They did not rise above the suspicion of their neighbors. They ended in pain, disgrace, or silence. But even in those endings, something endured. The cautionary tale itself is a form of survival. The villagers may mock, the priests may condemn, but the wizard is not forgotten. His death becomes a story, and in stories, he lingers, still muttering in the shadows, still scratching symbols on parchment, still chasing gold in a crucible that never yields. The wizard dies. The tale does not. The image that lingers today is of the wizard in his tower, white-bearded and robed, staff in hand, summoning fire from the air and wisdom from the stars. It is a figure of power, of mystery, of control over forces too vast for ordinary mortals. Children dress as him for festivals. Stories crown him as the mentor to kings and heroes, and even the word itself carries a weight of wonder. But this myth, gleaming and tidy, is stitched together from scraps of a reality far dirtier, far sadder, and far more human. The real medieval wizard lived not in a stone tower but in a drafty hut, his beard matted, his robe stained with candle wax and sweat. His staff was less a symbol of magic than a stick for walking on swollen, mercury-poisoned joints. The grandeur of the myth survives. The squalor of the man has been forgotten. The myth was built on need, as much as imagination. Villagers wanted to believe in someone who could intercede when crops failed or loved ones sickened, and so they made the wizard larger than life in their stories, his powers inflated with every retelling. Nobles wanted to believe they had allies who could glimpse the future or summon fortune, and so they dressed their wizards in robes of importance and treated them like oracles, until those predictions soured, and then the same robes marked them as heretics. Even the church, while condemning sorcery, fed the myth by painting wizards as men who truly could consort with demons. The more the church insisted wizards were dangerous, the more the common imagination believed they must be powerful. Fear and fantasy built the figure together, each exaggeration cementing the legend. The reality, though, was a patchwork of charlatans, scholars, and mystics. Some were outright tricksters, men who dazzled peasants with sleight of hand, charged for potions they knew were nothing but colored water, and fled town before their schemes were uncovered. Others were earnest scholars who spent their lives squinting over half-legible manuscripts, fumbling with crucibles, and recording observations that would one day, accidentally, serve as the roots of chemistry and astronomy. Still others were mystics, convinced they could bridge heaven and earth, their rituals half prayer, half performance, their bodies worn down by fasting and fear. They did not belong to a single class or calling. The word wizard covered them all, from the quack selling charms at the fair to the monk bending scripture to justify experiments in secret. Over centuries, these fragments fused into something different. The alchemist who blackened his lungs with smoke became the wise man who could transmute lead into gold with a gesture. The astrologer scribbling star charts by candlelight became the seer who could summon comets at will. The healer mixing herbs in his garden became the magician who spoke the language of nature itself. Even their failures were transformed. Explosions that once left men coughing and blind became spectacular feats of spellcraft in later tales. The paranoia that haunted them, fear of mobs, of trials, of hell, was washed away, leaving only serene mastery. History's cautionary tales were reshaped into fantasy's champions, yet some traces of truth remain in the myth, though warped. The obsession with secret books echoes the wizard's desperate struggle to copy grimoires in cramped script, mistakes and all. The image of circles on the floor recalls the protective chalk lines they scrawled in fear of spirits. The wizard's staff still carries the memory of a stick used to steady a weary body. Even the image of the wizard's familiar, owl, cat, or toad, springs from the reality of vermin, pets, and pests that filled their smoky workshops. Pop culture keeps the outlines but forgets the cost. It remembers the glamour but erases the sickness, the poverty, the paranoia. What, then, is the legacy of the medieval wizard? Not wealth. Most died broke. Not fame. Most were forgotten, except as names in parish records or burned into the memory of their accusers. Their legacy is paradox. They were mocked as fools and feared as heretics, yet they carried threads of knowledge forward. They poisoned themselves with mercury and arsenic, yet stumbled onto truths about matter that shaped the birth of science. They read the stars to divine love and war, and in doing so, recorded the heavens with a precision that guided ships and scholars for centuries. They brewed love potions that failed, but in the attempt preserved herbs and remedies that became medicine. They died as cautionary tales, yet left behind scraps of wisdom that would eventually prove caution unnecessary. And in the end, it is that paradox that makes them endure. They remind us that knowledge is rarely born clean or orderly. It crawls out of confusion, clothed in mistakes, carried by men who are half believed and half condemned. The medieval wizard was not Gandalf. He was not Merlin. He was a coughing, ink-stained, lice-bitten figure hunched over a table, working by candlelight, afraid of both neighbors and demons. And yet, without him, the path to modern science would be emptier, dimmer, harder to follow. Today, we dress them in legend because the truth is harder to swallow. It is easier to imagine them commanding lightning than choking on fumes. Easier to picture them in towers than in crumbling huts. Easier to call them wise than to admit they were desperate, flawed, and fragile. But remembering the truth matters, if only to measure the distance we've come. So thank the wizard, in all his poverty and paranoia. Thank him for the scraps of data, the failed recipes, the half-formed ideas that seeded chemistry, astronomy, and medicine. Thank him for suffering so you do not have to. And when you picture him, robes, staff, tower, fire, remember that beneath the myth was a man who paid for every imagined miracle, with smoke in his lungs and fear in his heart. Then thank modern science you do not live his life.